Hello. It's working now. Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. Uh, Good to see you all. It's been too long, and thank you, Stony. Thank you for the resub. Fixed. Yeah, we're in. We're in it. We're in it. And it sounds like the notification sounds are working as well. It's been, I think, like 2 weeks since our last stream. Welcome in, everyone. Glad to see you. The plan today is to go through the Svelte tutorial. Now, I have been using Svelte for a very long time. Let's see how long I've been using Svelte. We're going to go look at old Coding Garden videos, filter by Svelte, and see that I did a What is Svelte and Thoughts on Svelte video in 2019, June 15th, 2019. And I also built like a simple little app with Svelte without going through the tutorial. How long ago was June 15th, 2019? In Corntrop, thank you for the prime. Days ago. How many days ago? Isn't there an easy way to calculate this? Yeah, how long ago was July 5th, 2020? 4 years! So I wrote my first bit of Svelte code 4 years ago. Um, and I actually have never done the tutorial. And what's up, Mattia? Welcome in. Mattia is like the king of Svelte on YouTube right now. Just search for the Joy of Code on YouTube, and he's uploading a lot of videos about Svelte. But yeah, I've been using Svelte for over 4 years, and I never did the tutorial. So we're gonna do the tutorial today because I'm gonna be giving a meetup talk next week on Tuesday. Called Intro to Svelte, and I have an idea of what I want to do, but I want to go through their tutorial to just get an idea of how they think we should learn Svelte. But I think in general, like I typically have I think a good point of view because I've written Vue, I've written React, so I can come at the idea of introducing someone to Svelte from that point of view. As in, like, you've built front-end applications before. What are the key things you need to know about Svelte? Instead of, like, learning about components from the ground up, that kind of thing. But because I've literally never done the tutorial, we're going to do the tutorial. And I'm going to take some notes as I go. Yeah, my point of view, exactly. Yeah, so how'd you learn Svelte without doing the tutorial? So I would say the examples are different than a tutorial, right? So if Svelte has always had the examples, and honestly, the tutorial is a more recent addition to the Svelte documentation, but they've almost always had this examples tab. And the thing is, as a front-end developer that's worked with React, that's worked with Vue, there are things that I want to do. Like I want to declare a variable reactively. And so this example shows me exactly how to do that. I can take that and then apply it to the code that I'm trying to write. And Fob, thank you for the 10 months. Your stickers are in the mail, Fob. I ended up not sending more than that because it was pretty expensive. And then what else? Yeah, so like if I want to learn about conditionals, I just learned it from the examples here. If I want to learn about adding DOM events, I learn it from the examples. So really, it was taking what I already knew about building front-end apps and just figuring out how is it done in Svelte. Now, that said, that might mean that I maybe develop some bad habits. Like maybe I have some Reactisms or some Vueisms that I'm trying to apply to Svelte, which is why it's probably better to make sure you go through their documentation and their tutorials. But yeah, I wanted to use Quick, but I'm struggling a lot with only their docs. There's not any really good tutorials. Yeah, and I think it also just comes with experience, like taking it from the perspective of like, I know what I want to do. Now, how do I do it with this given library or framework? I mean, if you remember, we tried to somehow get Quick to do client-side rendering, which actually might not be possible, but we spent like an hour trying to figure that out. And honestly, we weren't really looking at their docs much. We were kind of just using what we knew about Vite and Vite plugins to get it working. So I don't know. I think my answer is it just comes with experience. You just gotta keep reading docs. Don't drop the database says documenting components with Storybook. Storybook has no Next 3 support, but Vue 3 support. Oh, how can I auto import composables in Vue 3? I have no idea. I mean, I would search for that though. I'm guessing somebody has done Storybook with Nux 3, but I see what you're saying. You're defining components that have auto imports and then they're not working with Storybook. So basically there's a build process, like an intermediary build process with Nux 3 where those auto imports actually get imported. So you might have to create some sort of middleware or plugin for Storybook that does that as well. But yeah. I need help with Svelte with routing without login and a rehydration issue. That sounds like Svelte Kit. I don't know how to help you, at least without seeing some code. Welcome in, Efficacy. Glad to see you. And the real Greg, it's been a while. Welcome in. Appreciate the resub. And actually, Greg, I don't know if you're still in the Colorado area, but I started up the Denver Script meetup. Denver Script. I mean, you probably knew this. I was running the Vue meetup for a while, but I switched over to doing Denver Script because it has a wider audience. But if you're still in Colorado, you should check it out. We're doing it next Tuesday. And Fury. No, the She-Boss. Thank you for the gift. Appreciate you. Yeah, happy Friday, Greg. Welcome in. Yeah. You're still in Denver? Nice. Yeah, you should check it out. I guess we've never met. You've been in the chat for a long time. What's your resub? Yeah, 39 months. Cool, but yeah, thank you, Lazy Guru, for the 6 months. Default GM with the 20 months. Safety J with the 4 months. Stony with the 23 months. Corntrop with the 2 months, who says, we missed you. I missed you all too. And Fob with the 10 months. Greg with the 39. And the She-Boss with the gift. Appreciate you all. So yeah, that's my Svelte story. Basically, I've been using Svelte for a long time. And if you've been tuning into the Friday streams, I've been working on a thing called listed. Do we have a listed command? We do, yeah. So you can learn more about listed here, but this is being built with Svelte Kit, which uses Svelte, but it's a lot more than that because it's a server-side rendering framework. It does file-based routing, and does like data loading and a lot of other stuff that you would want in a meta framework. But that's Svelte Kit. Svelte itself can be used without a server-side process. Like Svelte itself can be used as a purely front-end framework. And that's the introduction that I'm going to be giving in my meetup talk. So yeah, let's say hi to everybody and then we'll jump right in. Like my plan is to actually start at the top with the Svelte tutorial and then just take notes as I go. I mean, I'll probably initially take notes of their outline and their scaffolding. Scaffolding is a term that basically is how do you lay out information in a course or in a lesson. So I'm going to take hints from their scaffolding, but I'm basically also going to be working on my own. And probably the first thing that I would cover in my talk is what is Svelte. I also like to cover like the history of things. And I think it was like 7 years ago at this point. 7 or 8 years ago, I did an intro to Vue conference talk at Develop Denver. Let's see if we can find it. 5 years ago? No, that was at the Vue.js meetup, so it was like a year or two before that. Wait, no, maybe it was. Maybe it was. August 10th, 2017. How long ago was this? And what's up, Amisil? Welcome in. 5 years, 11 months, and 11 days. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with showing how long I've been doing this stuff, but the only reason that I mention this is in this talk about Vue, probably like I front load it. Like the first part of it is actually talking about like the history of Vue and where it came about and stuff like that. So I definitely I'm going to cover that in here. And it's actually a very interesting history because if you look at, I think it's Svelte version 1, and actually I think that's going to be part of my meetup talk, is I'm going to show a bit of code and ask people, what framework is this? And it's Svelte. Yeah. Wait, did you just learn my last name? You did, yeah, that is my last name. It's known. My last name is known. I just don't talk about it that much. I want to make a whole history of all kinds of like history of front end frameworks, history of JavaScript, history of like front end JavaScript, history of back end JavaScript. There's a lot of history videos that I want to do. I just don't know if it's worth my time to do them. I don't know how well they're gonna do. I don't know. Oh well, let's say hi to everybody and then we're gonna jump in. Like I said, we're gonna do the tutorial, but also take notes as we go, and I'll give you my perspective on the things as we're learning them. So if you'd like to say hello to me in the chat, you can say hi, hello, hello, hey, yo, cheers, and Dr. Phantom, thank you for the 7 months. Greetings, hi, sup, what's up, morning, afternoon, evening, howdy, good day, coding hi-yo, or vohio, or boga hey. Say any one of those things. I will acknowledge you. Here we go. And what's up, Avi? Welcome in. Good to see you. All right. 23 minutes ago, Don't Drop the Database said hello. Hello, my friends. What's up, Don't Drop the Database? And what's up, Veep and Speedstrat and iRossum? Hello, Sej. Good luck on the boot camp. What's up, Nightcoder and Winter Not Found and Siraj and Physotronic and Doomvit and Mattia and Salahuddin and the Sheboss and Limotes. What's up, Mert Kenny Yurt? Says, I want to ask something. I'm currently learning JavaScript. Is React easy to learn after JavaScript? I wouldn't say it's easy to learn, but I would say you're doing it in the right order. You should learn the basics of JavaScript first before trying to jump into React. And it's not going to be easy. Actually, just change your mentality on all of this. Like, it's never going to be easy. Some things are going to be like slightly easy, but if you take it from the perspective of it's going to be hard and you're going to have to work at it, you're going to have a better time. Because if you go into it thinking it's going to be easy, you're not going to have a good time. And I'm not trying to gatekeep here. I'm trying to help you set your expectations. Because everybody kind of wants it to just be easy, and it's not easy. Learning to code is not easy. Some parts of it might be, and some parts might come naturally, but overall it's not easy. Okay, what's up, Prasant? And Amasil, and Diamond, and Safety J. Hello, Avi, and Manaj, and Prawin, and Fun Planet, and Pohitun. What's up? And Fallen Learns. Hello, and Ed, and Jay Todoid. Glad to see you. What's up, Dr. Phantom? Welcome in, everyone. Good to see you. Let's jump right in. We're going to learn Svelte. So like I said, we're just going to do the tutorial. So if you go to svelte.dev, they have all this info. And honestly, I guess we can get meta with it and talk about, like, if you're a beginner and you're trying to learn something, how would you go about it? Because there's different ways to approach it, right? What I'm about to do is their official tutorial. So this is learn.svelte.dev. And if you see something labeled as a tutorial, it is typically guided. Like, and they're typically going to be, you're going to be building a specific app, or there are going to be sections in the tutorial that teach you something and then have you practice that thing. And so that's typically what a tutorial is. But that's different than the docs, because if we go to read the docs, this more so isn't meant to be followed from the beginning to the end. Like, you technically could, but never in my life have I done that with a bit of documentation. Typically, I'll read the introduction, but then from there, I'll kind of like bounce in and out to all of these different sections depending on what I'm trying to do. And that's very different than just following a tutorial, because the tutorial is going to tell you exactly what to do. It's going to prompt you. It's going to ask you to do something. You try to solve it. It potentially has a solution for you. That's very different than the docs. The docs are typically what we use in our day-to-day of working with a thing. So you wouldn't really treat the docs like a tutorial. But they are useful and you should get used to reading them, but it's different. And then that's also different than examples. So you have tutorial, which is guided. You have docs, which is basically everything, but you're not supposed to go through all of it all at once. It's kind of all there for you if you ever need it. And then you also have examples. And in this case, examples are specific things that you might want to do, and they're displayed in isolation. So this is giving you an example of how do I take a JavaScript variable and then render it in a template. This is one example of that. And as a front-end developer, that makes sense. I'm going to be doing this a lot in my front-end apps. So there's things in here that I do all the time that I might come back and reference in examples, like how do I do conditionals? And this is just like an isolated example of conditionals. Or how do I do loops? And this is an isolated example of loops. And so when you're learning a thing, all three of these have their uses, right? You have the docs, you have the isolated examples, and you have the tutorial, but you use them in different ways. So I would say try not to confuse them and be very deliberate in deciding what you're going to do. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to do the tutorial. So we're kind of approaching this like we've never even heard of Svelte before, maybe, and we're trying to learn it from scratch. And we're going to see how the tutorial is. Now, I will say, like in my career, sometimes I might, in the past, I'll say, I might have started with the tutorial and then at a certain point kind of just abandon the tutorial and decide to go and build my own thing. And from there, I just reference the docs and the examples. But it's really up to you and your learning style and also how long you've been doing this to determine should you start with the tutorial. But we're going to start with the tutorial, and here we go. All right. Welcome to Svelte. This will teach you everything you need to know to easily build applications of all sizes with high performance and small footprint. And so they tell you right in the tutorial. You can also consult the API docs, which is what I showed you, or the examples. If you're impatient, you can start hacking on your machine locally. Yeah. Is Vue still my favorite framework? Vue still has a special place in my heart, but ultimately in my mind, they've kind of lost out to Svelte. And the reason being, like, Svelte has a very similar developer experience, but in certain areas, an even better developer experience because it doesn't have to use a virtual DOM. Yeah. So the thing is, like, in Svelte and Vue have like learned from each other. So if you look at Svelte version 1, it almost looks exactly like how Vue used to look before they introduced the composition API. So they have learned from each other, and then now more recently, Vue has the script type setup, which looks more similar to Svelte. Let's see if we can find it in their docs. Yeah, script setup. So this was more recently introduced in Vue version 3, where now you can essentially have variables and then like reference them. But the issue is, so out on the surface, this looks very similar to Svelte. Like, it's very straightforward. You have your script, you have your template. That's one of the things I love about Svelte compared to something like React, where like React makes you put everything into a function, and behind the scenes, that function actually has to run over and over again. Whereas, and that's like the render process. That's how React works. Whereas when you compare that to like Vue and Svelte, your script is up here, your template is up here, and you don't have to think about this code running over and over again. This code like runs once, and you have certain things that might run again every time there's a render, but things are laid out in a much more logical way, I think. But this is the one piece about Vue that's a little bit cumbersome, is that if you want a reactive variable, you have to wrap it in ref or wrap it in reactive, and that gets cumbersome. Whereas if you compare that to Svelte, Svelte just lets you use variables. You literally just have a variable, and this is actually a reactive variable. You don't have to do anything special. Whereas if you wanted to replicate this same thing in Vue, you would have to wrap it in a ref. And so that's the one piece that now it's like, well, if I want my code to look like this, I might as well just use Svelte, because Vue just has that little bit extra that I have to do anyways. So I don't know. React is beautiful in its own way. React is beautiful in that if you really know what you're doing, you can do some really cool stuff. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's really easy to do things that aren't ideal, I would say. It probably still works, but it's easier to not know what you're doing and do it right in Svelte and Vue than it is in React. I'll say that. Do I think Svelte can replace React? Yeah, I think it can, but it probably won't, because React is so popular and prevalent. Yeah, and I think I'm coming around to the syntax, right? So my whole thing early on was like, all right, if you've literally invented a language, then why are your conditionals so cumbersome, right? This weird syntax here. And if you compare that to in like Vue, vif is a directive that lets you do conditional rendering. So if this is true, render this. And I liked this, but the thing to know about like the underlying implementation is that with syntax like this, the compiler can more easily optimize it. It's probably still possible with like directives, but it's much easier for the template compiler to optimize this when it's generating your application. And you can also compare that to like a ternary statement in a React app. that does not get optimized. Like a ternary statement does not get optimized away in React. It just stays there in your bundled code. It might get minified slightly, but like the ternary is always going to be there. The Svelte compiler is smart enough to see like if you have some kind of conditional statement here that will like never be true, it'll just that won't even get compiled into the resulting like template render function thingy. And you just can't do that with like ternaries, and you could potentially do it with directives, but I don't know. But that's the underlying reason of like why the syntax is so ugly and different, is like these things can be optimized away, whereas in the other frameworks they're kind of just like embedded in the template. Yeah. Biggest stumbling block with Svelte was integrating with Electron. Yeah, the thing is you can integrate most front-end stuff with Electron, so it's really just a matter of like learning Electron at that point. What's up, Marquez? Welcome in. Yeah. For sure, Safety J. Yeah, we'll get to that. And honestly, I need to just go. I mean, this is turning into a just chatting stream, and that's fine, but yeah. This is from 2018. Count equals 1, double equals count times 2. Oh, so like this eventually, so I mean, this was from 2018, and what he's saying here is like he just wants this to be a reactive declaration. Is that what he's saying? Is that what he's saying? I actually don't know what he's saying here. Only top-level variables would be exposed to the markup and made reactive. Oh. Cool. But yeah, I think honestly that's my whole mentality as well when like looking at these front-end frameworks and how they do things. It's like if you've built large applications with Svelte or with Vue, and you've built large applications with React, you can start to make the comparisons and just see that with React, like 80 to 90% of the time, you have to write more code. There's more things you have to think about, more things you have to consider, versus having to write the same thing with Vue or Svelte. And as a programmer, I want to do less work. I want to write less code. So like I would prefer the framework to like take care of that stuff for me. So that's just my perspective and my opinion, you know? Yeah. How am I doing? I'm doing all right, Yash. Welcome in. Will React make a developer experience comeback with a compiler? Maybe. And I think honestly, people are trying. Is it Million.js that does it? And then also the idea of signals. So a virtual DOM replacement for React gain big performance wins for UI and data heavy React. Yeah, so the promise of Million.js is you can take a regular plain old React app and not have a virtual DOM, not have all like the weird render cycles and stuff like that. Weird, what do I mean by weird render cycles? Not have to deal with constant renders and optimizations and stuff like that. But yeah, they're trying. I don't know how popular they are. 11.4 thousand stars. They're pretty popular. So yeah, it's happening. But yeah, it's happening. I don't know. Yeah, signals are very hot right now. It is true. All right. I have to stop digressing. Here's the thing: is like I could compare it to React and Svelte all day. We got to do the tutorial. All right, we're not going to do the init. I think I'm going to kind of like I'm not going to read this word for word because I feel like you don't want to watch me read this word for word. We're kind of going to just dive into the tutorial. But when I do my Meetup talk, I am going to dive into like what is Svelte and a history of Svelte, but we're not going to do that right now. Let's go. Our first component. All right. In Svelte, an application is composed from one or more components. A component is a reusable self-contained block of code that encapsulates HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that belong together, written in a .svelte file. So in their tutorial here, they give you this app.svelte file. You can see that it gets rendered out just like that. Easy. But basically everything in this one file is the app component. But we can add some data. So this is what I was talking about earlier. You add a script, and then inside that script you define variables, And then you can reference those variables in your template. So I could do like this, and it just renders out like that. Cool, like that. Easy. But what we'll see probably further along in the tutorial is when you modify these variables in your script, they automatically get updated in the UI. Nothing crazy there. Or nothing crazy that you have to do. You just modify the variable, it gets updated. Easy. There's no use effect. There's no use state. Define a variable, reference it, modify that variable, gets updated in the view. That's what's so great about Svelte. Yeah, and then the other thing is you can use expressions in here. So anything inside of the curly braces that is valid JavaScript will actually get executed here. So I guess we'll talk about SFC, single file components. We'll talk about expressions in valid.js. Cool. What else do they tell us to do? That's it for now. All right, now dynamic attributes. Just like you can use curly braces to control text, you can use them to control element attributes. Our image is missing a source, so let's add one. So we have a variable that has a URL inside of it, and then we can add the source attribute with curly braces to reference it. Boom, we all just got rickrolled. But the tutorial is also telling us to look at the errors that we get. Yeah, we got rickrolled. I did the first few ones earlier today, so I at least know what's going to happen here. After this one, I have no idea what's going to happen. But yeah, the tutorial tells us that if you hover, you actually get accessibility errors. So A11Y is accessibility. Image elements should have an alt attribute. So part of making this accessible for like a screen reader, so someone who's visually impaired may not be able to see that they got rickrolled. So you might have some alt text that says never going to give you up. And then now someone who's visually impaired also has the opportunity to get rickrolled. So yeah. It's actually really cool. I will say this. I'll give you some meta commentary. I like the fact that we're only on step 2 or 3 in the tutorial, and they're talking about accessibility. I don't know how it is in the React docs, but that's cool. I like that they do that up front. Yeah. We can use curly braces inside attributes. What? All right. Okay, actually, I did not know you could do this. This is new to me. So I always thought that you would potentially have to have a like template string right here. It literally interpolates inside of the quotes. That's fascinating. Did you know you could do that, Mattia? That's new to me. Typically, what I would do is I would put this whole thing as an expression and then put a template string inside of it, like this. And then inside of here, because it's just an expression, I would do this. And then that works. The thing is, so when you do it this way, this feels more like Vue.js, because that's what a lot of people don't like about Vue.js is like embedding expressions inside of attributes feels weird, because like you potentially don't use double curly braces. But this is good to know. You inside of attributes, you can. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, I feel like, especially like because all the other Svelte syntax is curly braces at the top level. Honestly, this kind of this complicates it a little bit. Yeah. But both of those work, so that's fascinating. So yeah, we'll talk about attributes. Yeah, and then shorthand attributes are fun. So this is kind of like computed property names. I think that's the right way to say it in JavaScript, where if the attribute name is the same as the variable, you can just do this. And this will work. So let's put it there. This basically adds an attribute with that name and sets the value. I mean, we honestly could do a similar thing here. And what do you mean a noctate? How do you escape this? What do you mean by that? So we could do something like, say, let alt text equals this. Yeah, object shorthand properties. I think that's what it's called in JavaScript, shorthand property objects. But if we put alt into another variable, we could do something like that, and that would work the same way. Yeah. So React actually does React have, no, React has like Boolean attributes. That's what I was thinking of. Is like if you have a Boolean value that you want to set on a component instance, you can do like this, and like that sets it to true. That's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, it'd be nice if you could do that in React. I do that all the time. All right, let's move on to styling. So far we have expressions, attributes, and really just like talking about the curly syntax. And Jim, thank you for the tier 1. 34 months, that's great. TypeScript Tea Time says, no, it doesn't have it, and it's driving me crazy. Yeah. Exactly, Dr. Phantom. And honestly, that should be the goal of most frameworks, right? Most frameworks I mean, it depends. Obviously, there's levels of like how much should it do for you and just like get out of the way. But in my experience, React does not get out of the way. It gets in the way, honestly. All right. Yeah, well, this is the interesting part though, Diamond, is like the aspect of styling here is that you get scope styles by default. Like one of the reasons people like to use Tailwind is because they're scoped to wherever you use them. But with Svelte, you kind of get that for free. So let's see what it says. So in our codes here, we can write some CSS. They want us to target the p tag. So let's do it. And we'll say the color is gold, and the font family is Comic Sans MS. Is that it? Comic Sans? Anybody know how to do this? What can I do? Is it this Comic Sans MS? Yeah, that's the one. Okay. And the font size is 48 pixels. Nice. Cool. So this, like we talked about earlier, this is your component. Your component then can have a style attribute, and then you can style the things in your component. But the thing to notice here is we're not doing anything special. We're just targeting this P. But let's actually look and see what styles get generated. Look at that. So we see this randomly generated class name on there. And so behind the scenes, what Svelte does is it generates a style sheet with unique class names that are only used and referenced by this one component. So if two different components add a p tag style, they're going to get two different class names. And actually, technically, it actually does some caching. So one of the strings in here is like a hash. And so if some other component copy pasted the exact same style, I do believe it's going to be optimized away. I do believe that because those two styles get compiled into the same class name, it might actually get optimized away. I could be wrong there, but I think it's possible because of the hashing that it does in the class name. But cool. So how are they going to demonstrate this? Yeah, so importantly, these rules are scoped to the component. You won't accidentally change the style of p elements elsewhere in your app. Cool. And then they're going to show us nested components and how the styles don't leak out. So yeah, it'd be impractical to do everything in a single component. So what we want to do is import some nested component. And Eddie, thank you for the 28 months. In this example, copy paste is currently disabled. That's fine. That's fine. They don't want me to copy paste the code. But what we want to do is we have a script tag. I'm gonna import nested from nested. Cool. Yeah. So behind the scenes, they've defined. Okay, I just couldn't see it in the file tree here. We can see that there is a nested component that has a p tag, and we are importing it in here. And then what they're telling us to do is to just reference that nested component like you would. But notice, the styles don't leak out of the parent component, right? The parent component defines a style tag for p. But if we go into nested, it has a p tag, but it does not get the style applied to it. And that's because of the scope styling here. So the styles only stay within the component. And he says, where have I been? I don't know. Just trying to figure out my life, thinking about things. Will I cover state management? We're just going to go through the tutorial. I think, yeah, we're about to get into reactivity in the next section. So I think we will. Yeah. Agent, I don't know if I've heard of Agent GPT. Yeah, so notice that nested Svelte has a P and the styles don't leak out. Component names are always capitalized to distinguish them from HTML elements. Yeah, this is this is a thing in React as well. Components. You always capitalize your component names. In Vue, you don't. I don't think you have to do that, or maybe you do. I don't think you do. Oh yeah, you're totally right. Or I'm gonna call you PT. Let's see if the styles are optimized in the way that I thought, right? So if I literally copy this style, and well, if I copy the whole thing, put it into the nested component. So now they're styled in the same way, but let's look at the generated code, right? Do they get the same class name? They don't. They don't. So it's not optimizing it at that level. The thing is, it could. It could. Honestly, if you use the right kind of I don't even know the name for it, but it's basically generating class names. So like this is there very likely is an injected style tag like this, right? So this is injecting that style tag into the page so that this class name actually exists. But I'm wondering if the build process could do that optimization. But by default, at least in dev, it's not doing that optimization. Collisions would be a horrible thing to debug. Yeah, but the thing is, like, if the style hashes to the exact same thing, it should be the exact same style. So therefore, it could be shared. So, but honestly, that might be the case, right? Diamond is like, there's no point in optimizing it because it's just another style tag. Don't know. All right, let's keep moving. All right, now we're talking about tags. Ordinarily, strings are inserted as plain text, meaning that characters like this and that have no special meaning. But sometimes you need to render HTML directly into a component. For example, the words you're reading right now exist in a markdown file that gets included on this page as a blob of HTML. Oh, I see what you mean, PT. If there was a hash collision, you're totally right. But these days, don't we have hashing algorithms that haven't shown collisions yet? But maybe it's not worth the trouble. Maybe it's not worth the possible collisions. In Svelte, you do this with a special @HTML tag. Yeah, warning, Svelte does not perform any sanitization. So yeah, right now you can see that by default, all of the stuff that gets rendered here gets escaped. Like it's not actually rendering out the strong tag. But if we add @HTML, then it will render the strong tag. But that opens us up to some cross-site scripting like this. Well, it's like running the code instantly. So basically, this is what you need to worry about. If we need a how can I trigger a syntax error so it doesn't rerun? This is what I do. Pwned. So if this string came from an untrusted source and you're just rendering it into the page like this, you're opening yourself up to a potential cross-site scripting like this. Pwned. So most of the time you don't want to do this. Like the only time you would ever actually want to do this at HTML thing is if you're dealing with like Markdown or you're building some kind of blog where the code is coming from a database or something like that. I don't know, but it's cool that you can do that. I honestly, I may or may not mention it in my talk. All right. Now we're on to reactivity. So this is where the fun stuff starts to happen, where we modify variables and then they automatically get updated in the view. So wire up an event handler. We'll learn more about DOM events later. Okay, so on an element, you can say on and then specify any DOM element. And in this case, we want to listen for the click. So when we click, do a thing. And in this case, we want to call the increment method. So when this button is clicked, call this function. And inside that function, we just want to increment. So we can say count plus plus like that. And so now, done. That's all it takes. And so if you're coming from the React world, this might be blowing your mind because you don't have to do use state and then set state. You literally just have a variable and you modify that variable. This is the thing where so many people are like, oh, React is just JavaScript. But you have to do so many things that are like React specific. To me, this feels like just JavaScript, right? Like I declare a variable and I change it, and then the view automatically updates accordingly. One thing to note is, so we're doing like an inline conditional statement here. So if it's one, then we pluralize it as singular. But if it's more than one, then we do a pluralized as with an S. But yeah, this is just JavaScript. This is just JavaScript. I like that it does what we want in the way that we expect. Yeah. Under the hood, it's similar to React. Does this editor get to show us the generated code? Maybe not. Yeah, so I would say in the Svelte world, we probably would use a conditional here rather than a ternary. You can see it in the REPL. Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about it for now, but basically the code that gets generated here would be modifying the variable under the behind the scenes. So Svelte instruments the assignment with some code that tells if the DOM will need to be updated. Actually, I mean, I am curious to show you what happens here. So yeah, you can look at the JS output. And I think what's fascinating is if we look at the generated output code, there is literally going to be some vanilla JavaScript that says like element.textContent equals some value or element.set attribute of some value. Like Svelte literally generates like the vanilla JavaScript code, and there is no virtual DOM here. Let's see. So invalidate 0, count plus 1. It's just a function. Wait, this has an expression. Wouldn't this need to be like a function that gets run? I guess not, because when handle click runs, this expression will run. T3 value? Ah, they have helpers for it. You're right. So they have this built-in helper called text that I'm sure sets like the text content from Svelte internal. Honestly, let's go source code diving. Let's go see what Svelte internal looks like. I'm curious. So we're going to go to the Svelte repo, look at the packages, look at Svelte. Compiler? Internal? where are we? Utils maybe? Where can we find this stuff? There's literally a T3 value. Yeah, but it's being, so yeah, there's this one. Yeah, you're totally right. So it has the value here, but then this is the line of code that actually updates it on the DOM. This is the line of code that will like set that text on the DOM. I do believe. They don't, I mean, they still use TypeScript, but they don't use it directly in their code. Like they have type definition files. I just don't know what I would search for though. Let's search for Svelte internal. It could be that this code gets completely generated. So the tests get to import it. Is it a separate package? Quickly navigate to, the thing is it's not /internal. So like we have packages, Svelte, like there is no internal. Could be the runtime. Oh, there it is. I found it. And then I want to see text. So this is source runtime internal. Is it in utils? Got removed in Svelte 4? I don't know. I feel like we should be able to find it though. Maybe is this not using Svelte version 4? It's 4.1.1. It's importing from that. Oh, it's probably going to be in DOM. It's going to be in DOM, and it's going to be called text in here. That's my guess. There it is. Document.create text node. We figured it out. So then we reached the actual DOM code. So this creates a DOM node, and then this appends that DOM node. And then set data is going to be a function that potentially updates the DOM. Text.data. So I see. So this DOM node that gets returned, they put a data property on it. And then they potentially use that data property elsewhere. Right, so the text function creates a text node, document.create text node. This is like vanilla DOM. And then they add that data property, and then they probably do something internally with that data property. Yeah. I tried solid one time. It was pretty solid. Yeah. It's possible that this assignment right here is like reactive, like isolated reactive. So behind the scenes, this is potentially like a proxy or like a defined property. So that when it gets set under the hood, it actually will set like the text content. Or is it that a text node has a data property? Maybe I just don't know about vanilla DOM. Create a text node. Properties, yeah, data seems like an extra property. I don't know why I care. I'm gonna keep moving. But it is interesting to see the code that actually gets generated when you write. So you write code like this behind the scenes. It basically generates like very optimized DOM code to do the actual work. All right, let's keep moving. All right, Svelte automatically updates the DOM when your component's state changes. Often, some parts of a component state need to be computed from other parts. For these, we have reactive declarations. That's what I ask myself. Why am I doing this? I don't know. That's my thought as well, Yash. I don't know enough about it to say that's what's really happening, but that is what I expect. Like they set that data property and they already have code set up somewhere else that's listening for when that data property is set. I was about to just dive back into it because now I'm curious, but I mean, maybe it's in one of the other internals. Like maybe there's a reactive. Like the scheduler, maybe? All right, I'm not going to do it, though. We're going to keep moving. All right, so we have reactive assignments. If a reactive statement consists entirely of an assignment to an undeclared variable, Svelte will inject a let declaration on your behalf. Yeah, so here's the one gripe I have about the reactive declaration. They try to say that, oh, well, this is valid JavaScript syntax anyways, but the thing is, it's not used in the same way. Like they're hijacking the syntax to do it for something else. But let's see what we're talking about here. So we want to use doubled in our markup. So what we want to say is doubled is count times 2, right? But if we were to just define a variable like this, and we want to reference it in our template like this, this won't work. This won't work. So this gets defined, and then Svelte doesn't know that you want to keep that variable updated. But the way that you tell it, hey, keep that thing updated based on its dependencies, is you put a $sign in front of it. And HTTP 404, thank you for the resub. So just by putting that $sign, now Svelte knows, hey, this whole statement should be recalculated or rerun if any of its dependencies change. So looking at the statement on line 4, what are its dependencies? Like, what is that calculation dependent on? Anybody? Yeah, so it's technically a labeled statement, but it's not used in the same way. Like a labeled statement in JavaScript is like a go-to statement, if you've ever heard of that. That's not how this is being used here. Because you can actually have multiple labels. They all look the same. Like this, that wouldn't make as much sense if it actually were a labeled statement. But I'll wait for you to answer in the chat. What are the dependencies of line 4? Yeah, what is it dependent on? In terms of how it's parsed, yeah, but I think like my whole point is, if you're gonna make your own compiler in your own language anyways, why wouldn't you do like the easiest possible thing? like I mean, I guess yes, you also have to come up with, all right, so how do I say that this is a reactive statement? At that point, it would get more similar to view. That would be something like, I don't know, like watch. But I don't know. But yeah, Lead for Brains has it right. So the thing on this line that we are dependent on is count, right? So in order to calculate double, we need count. And so what happens automatically, Svelte behind the scenes knows that this line is dependent on count. So now when count changes, the doubled property also updates because count has changed. This is the same thing as like a use effect in React. Do we have a like a React playground? What's the best way to just write some React code right now? Is it like web containers maybe? Code Sandbox? Stack Blitz? Stack Blitz. The best way is don't. No, I want to show you. I want to show you the comparable thing. So yeah, show me React. Cool. All right. So in React, if we had a count variable, we would say count and set count. And then we would do a use state. We'd import it. Or I guess you don't have to import it if you just do React dot. Great. So we have our state variable. But now if I want code to rerun or to like basically be dependent on count. I guess in React, here's the thing. In React, you would just say count times 2 like this. But this is actually, I mean, it's fairly inefficient because this line of code basically runs every time the render function runs. So like, I think that's like the hidden thing about like in comparison here is in the React world, you probably would just write your code like this. But the thing is, this code is actually going to run every time the render function runs. If you wanted to do it in a similar way to how Svelte is actually doing it under the hood for free, and like this is all you have to do, like if you wanted to do the same thing in React, you would actually need to use the use memo. And so now this will only rerun if count changes, but actually it won't. What's the error on line 7? Like what am I missing here? And this is kind of the point that I'm getting at with Svelte, because you don't need this. Does anybody know? What's the issue with line 7? I would probably think that some of you that write React on a daily basis, what's the problem? It's React. Some of you that write React have probably never used use memo. Yeah, the dependency array. So if you want to use this, you have to declare a dependency array. And I guess we would also, I mean, we need to import it. We can do it like this. But here's the thing, even if I don't put the dependency array, does it still yells at me? Yeah, so it wants, TypeScript is yelling because it wants the dependency array. But now, what's wrong with this code? We forgot the dependencies. I know I'm being a little dramatic here, but I think basically what I'm trying to say is, this is how we do it in Svelte. We don't even really have to think about it. We just write it, it just works. It's automatically updates behind the scenes. In React, you have to manually declare the dependency array, and you have to know that you have to use this use memo thing. That's basically what I'm getting at. And the other thing is, like, once your dependent calculations get more complex, like they're dependent on more variables, in React, you have to remember every single time you have to go add that extra dependency variable. So yeah. So that's really all I'm trying to say. let's keep moving. Of course, you could just write count times 2 in the markup. You don't have to use reactive values. Yeah, and I think that's the other point that I was getting at is, like, in the React world, that's what most people would just do. They would just do this in their render function and not even think twice. But the issue is, this calculation runs every render regardless of if count changed. The optimization here is, this expression is only going to run if the dependencies change. And that's nice. It's nice that we get that by default. Like, we don't even have to think about those kinds of performance optimizations later on, because the code that we wrote is already somewhat performant. Yeah, and I think that's a whole thing. And what's also, like, what troubles me about the React world is there has been a lot of articles in performance benchmarks that people have run that have basically been like, well, you know what? Use memo for simple examples like this is actually more work. So it's better if you just write that. And then and this is actually going to be more performant than using use memo. But that's tricky because at what point do I actually need use memo? So how can I make that decision? And I think if you look in the React docs, they even tell you this. Like, don't use memo unless you have to. But I think that's my main issue with React is like you basically have to make a decision when you're defining a variable that has dependencies. Is like, do I write this as an expression, or do I make this a memoized calculation? You have to like make that decision. In the Svelte world, you don't even have to make that decision. You just use a labeled statement and it kind of just works. Yeah. I feel like I thought they were. Yeah, here we go. You should only rely on use memo as performance optimization. If your code doesn't work without it, find the underlying problem and fix it first. Then you may add use memo to improve performance. But I don't know. I think I also saw something recently that mentioned like the benchmarks that were done to say that use memo is slower than this, like, were somehow wrong. I don't know. You can have a weighted code on a labeled statement. You can. How do you do it? I don't know, but I've done it. I've had a labeled statement where it like resolve. I think basically you have to have like a dot then on it. But if the promise is resolved and there's dependencies in it, I'm pretty sure you can do it. But let's see. Okay, so we're not limited to declaring reactive values. We can also run arbitrary statements reactively. For example, you can log the value of count whenever it changes. Yeah. This is kind of beautiful here because this kind of just shows you, like, if you want a, what do you call it? Like almost like some state dev tools. All you have to do is label it, and now that statement will literally run anytime its dependencies change. You could do a similar thing in React, like with a use effect. But again, you'd have to use a use effect. You'd have to declare a dependency array on count, and then you can log count like this. Cool. So you've got that versus that. I don't know why this is turning into a comparison of React. I guess because there's a lot of React devs probably watching. Okay. And then so this is the other interesting thing. You can easily group statements in a block. So on a labeled statement, if you put it in a block, you can have as many labeled statements as you want inside that block. And those will run like this. Yeah. How relevant is the performance in your opinion? Do you think we should be worried about it when you choosing a framework? Here's the thing, Razor Sun, is like typically I actually don't even have to worry as much about performance. Like I just try to code the thing as best I can on the first time or on the first try. And if there are performance issues, I'll come back and try to optimize it. I definitely don't try to like optimize it up front. But kind of the argument that I want to make is with Svelte, it's easy to write performant optimized code up front without having to think too hard about it. Whereas in React, you have to think a bit harder about it. And there's a lot more decisions that need to be made and like potential trade-offs that you might have to think about or make when initially writing the code. That's kind of the argument that I'm making is you can write it in a performant way on the first go with Svelte, whereas with React, you might need to fine tune it later on if you run into performance issues. But like with Svelte, you're potentially less likely to run into performance issues because of the way things are happening in the way that you write your code. So yeah. What's up, Alka? What you might need to do, Avi, is like an well, I was gonna say an async iffy, but maybe not, because then it wouldn't rerun it. What's up, Alka? Welcome in. You can even put a colon in front of the things like if oh yeah, in front of things like if blocks. Cool. Like this. So if count is greater than or equal to 69. Console.log. Nice. Well, let's say if it equals 69. And get rid of this. Hey, Murdoch, welcome in. Nice. Nice. All right. Yeah. I don't think you do, Alka. I'm literally just going through the tutorial. But here we go. Updating arrays and objects. Now, this is the part also that I feel like Svelte can do better. But we'll talk about it. So, methods like push and splice won't automatically cause updates. For example, click the add a number button doesn't currently do anything. So, we have a button. It says add a number. When we click it, it calls add a number. Add a number just pushes another number into the array. And you'll notice that right now, it doesn't update the UI. And that's because push is not like a reactive function call. But if we want this to work, we can just reassign the variable. And basically, that's how you can think about how Svelte is working under the hood. Anytime it sees a variable assignment, it knows this is a place in the code that has a dependency and will potentially need to alert anybody that cares about this variable because it was reassigned. But now when we do this, we can see it update in the UI. And a lot of people hate this. A lot of people are like, well, you know what you should do is you should actually assign it to like this. Because this is how you do it this is how you do push something into an array in React, right? You copy the whole array and then put something on the end. And this works, but I would say this is the one thing you need to unlearn if you're coming from React to Svelte. Stop doing that. Like you're wasting precious memory and precious CPU cycles. Obviously, it doesn't matter as much, but behind the scenes, this uses more memory. This uses more calculations instead of just doing this, because you let Svelte know. So the Primogen doesn't like this syntax. They prefer this syntax. But no, I hate this syntax. Like honestly, I hate that immutable state updates have become the norm. And people write code like this. But so that wouldn't work, Zyrus, because you have to think about the return value. So the return value of push is undefined. So if you said numbers equals numbers dot push, then numbers would get reassigned to undefined. You'd have to look at array. You'd have to look at the return value of push. Returns the length. So you would basically be reassigning an array to a number accidentally. So that wouldn't work. There's a more idiomatic solution. Yeah. You can use, I don't call this the idiomatic solution. I think this is the other piece that has potential like performance impacts that you don't think about as much in a React app when you're trying to do immutable state updates like this. Because you're literally copying the whole array. You literally are. I mean, in the React world, it would make sense to use something like Imma.js. Because this does like reactive assignments in a more performant way under the hood. Does spread always create a new object? Yeah, so the spread syntax is typically either you're spreading into a new array or spreading into a new object. So the fact that we have the two square brackets means we are creating a new array. We're putting all of the old values into that array, so it has to copy them one by one. And then we're putting something new onto the end. It's just a lot more work. I think this is the other thing I guess I'm talking about in terms of like doing it the more performant way first, right? So like if you write code like this, you're going to come across less issues, right? Because let's say we're operating on a list of hundreds of thousands of things for whatever reason. I mean, there's probably other optimizations that need to happen if you're dealing with an array that big, but it happens. It happens where you have really big arrays on the front end. And when you have a little line of code like this on the front end with a really big array, it's going to be noticeably slow on a lot of different devices. You may not notice it on your dev machine, but if you're on a mobile phone or like an older computer, you're going to notice it. So just do this. Just do this. Assignments to properties of arrays and objects work. Yeah, so if you override a specific indice, it's that this works because the Svelte compiler sees this as an assignment, and it's going to add a little special piece of code there that knows to update anyone that's listening for changes to this variable. Seems inefficient. Every time we add a number, we allocate a new object or array. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, Discordant. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like, for small use cases like this, it's fine. It's fine. But in the real world, we deal with bigger arrays. So yeah. Yeah, so good question, Jan. In this example, it has to be a let because I'm doing the reassignment, right? So if I made this a const, this code is honestly, this technically should be a runtime error, but I think they have some like TypeScript stuff happening behind the scenes to give me that error ahead of time. Simple rule of thumb: the name of the updated variable must appear on the left-hand side of the assignment. Yeah. Here's the interesting thing, though. I don't know. You tell me, Mattia, because you've done a lot of Svelte stuff. Has anybody written like an array polyfill or an array wrapper? Because like one thing you could do, I think you could you do this? You could say something. Let's try it. Override the array prototype. Like this. And then like this. Okay, so now this doesn't work. How would you? I feel like there would be a way to do it. So like you override the arrays push that has an assignment inside of it. No, I guess the first argument wouldn't be. I guess if we make this a function, what happens if I assign this to itself inside of a function? Assignment to a return to a right value. So you can't change this. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you would do it. But it seems like this would be the way. Like under the hood, push should tell Svelte that there's an assignment happening here. Yeah, I love that I have zero clue what you're saying, but in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, do this even though you think that looks ugly. At the end of the day, it's going to be more performant. And just reassign the variable. Cool. Yeah, I think this is the one place where it could get tricky though, is like if you have like deeply nested property updates or something like that, you'll have to get clever with your assignments. No, so yeah, and I've seen this a lot with newer people learning Svelte. First of all, reactive declarations have to happen at the top level. Like they can't happen inside of a function. And then second of all, you have to think about reactive declarations rerun when their dependencies change. And in this case, there is no assignment. There's no assignment happening here, and that's when we know like a dependency changes if there was an assignment. Which is what's happening here on line 6. That's an actual assignment. So yeah, the reactive thing wouldn't work. There needs to be an assignment somewhere for Svelte to know that the thing changed. Yeah. Am I the only one who hates both ways? No, I hate both ways. I'm just saying since we have to do one of them, choose this. You know what would be ideal? Just that. And in the Vue world, we can do that. So in Vue, they augment all of the like the array type, so that push, shift, unshift, all of those methods are reactive in Vue, but that's because they actually augment the underlying array type. Will chaining methods to update the UI after push make a difference in the performance compared to reactive assignment? I don't know how you would chain methods. Let me know what you mean, Stout, because like the return value of push is technically the length of the array. So you can't chain a function like this on the end. Yeah. Oh, nice, Wacky-ator. Glad to hear it. Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats. You can pass dependencies with a period? I've never seen that before. Add a reactive block? I don't think that wouldn't also work because we're not at the top level. So you can't have reactive statements that aren't at the top level. But then again, Svelte doesn't know when to rerun this because there is no variable assignment. Literally nothing is changing here. I guess technically this would rerun if numbers gets reassigned elsewhere. And so like this could work, but this is only going to run if numbers gets changed elsewhere. It's going to basically push a new number in if numbers gets changed. Yeah. Yeah. I would prefer a notify function. Yeah, honestly, that might be the more svelte way of doing it, is saying like, hey, this thing has changed. Yeah, like a built-in signal. Well, that's the issue. If you put the assignment in the block, why put it in a labeled statement? I think that's it. Oh, I see. Yeah, you can. This is basically just using the comma operator, which the comma operator evaluates the whole expression here, and so because this is dependent on it, I guess. But again, you can't have a labeled statement inside of a function. We're kind of just stuck with it. So yeah. All right. Let's talk about props. So far, we've dealt exclusively with internal state, and any real application will need to pass data from one component down to its children. I think you did say period. Oh, yeah. So comma. And the comma makes sense to me because it's just the JavaScript comma operator. All right, export a variable. So yeah, nested, we need to say that we are accepting answer. So if you want to think about how this is working, so this is the parent component app. App is creating an instance of this nested component and trying to pass down the answer 42. Yeah. So it's passing down the number 42. But if we look at nested, yeah, right now, it's not accepting a prop. So to say that this is a prop, you just put the export keyword on it, and now the outside world can pass data in. I think this is the other thing that's just a lot nicer about Svelte, right? So in React, especially if you're dealing with React and TypeScript, it can be really cumbersome to declare props. Like every time you need a new prop, you're potentially like destructuring it and then augmenting your prop type. In Svelte, I guess if this were TypeScript, you just put the type on it, and now this is a prop that is of that type. No, you don't have to augment a special type. You don't have to reference it in multiple places. It's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. Yeah, I think, yeah, so this is the other thing. Like the export keyword is typically not used for this, right? The export keyword is typically used for modules, but the Svelte syntax is commandeering the export keyword in this scenario to say, this is how we declare that we are taking in a prop from the outside world. There's also a special type you can get access to outside that gives you the type props. Yeah, I was looking at that. Where did I see that? I don't even know if we're using that in my listed app yet, but yeah, props basically is typed and has all the prop types on it. Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that, Elka. We're exposing the variable, but I think there are certain scenarios where Svelte tried to use existing JavaScript keywords, because it technically is a custom language and custom compiler, which is why they used export. Yeah, so then you can declare default values. That makes sense. So over here, the answer is not here. And then if the outside world doesn't pass the answer in, it will use the default value. Yeah. All right, spreading props. In this exercise, we've forgotten to specify the version prop expected by package info. We could fix it by adding the version prop, but then properties of package, yeah, etc. Okay. So you have an object. It has a bunch of properties. Those properties exactly match up with the props you've defined for package info. So if we look at package info, oh no, it has all of those things defined as props. So those things need to be passed down as props here. So right now it says download version undefined because we forgot to pass down the version prop. So if we go back over here, we can specify version, and that's going to be package.version. And now everything gets passed down. But because the shape of this object matches all of the props that we're passing down, we can just spread them. So spread all of the properties of package as props onto this component. It automatically passes all of those down. I would say in most scenarios, you probably don't want to do this. This is hard. Like if you're working on a team, it's harder to read. It's harder to figure out, like what props are actually getting passed down there. And sometimes harder to debug. So this is nice, but honestly, most scenarios you want to avoid that. Oh, fascinating. So the double $ props you can access inside of the component. I've never done that before. Let's try it. So like technically, so you have all your props here. You technically can do $ props dot prop name and you still get access to it. I could imagine, Mattia. Yeah, in my experience, I haven't really needed it, but if you're building a component library or something, or I guess what you're saying is like if you're using a component library and you need to pass down a bunch of props, you might use the spread operator. Cool. Well, yeah. So $ props works. I've literally never used that before. All right. Now we're on to the logic section. So we're already we're past 3 sections. We're in logic now. Who's enjoying themselves? Type 1 in chat if you're having a good time watching me go through the tutorial here. I think really all I'm doing at this point is kind of just making a kind of shake and bake. At this point, I'm kind of making my own outline. For the talk that I give, I'm going to pare this down, right? Like, I don't think I should spend as much time on some of these things. But yeah, I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you all for sticking around. Let's keep moving. Okay, so HTML doesn't have a way of expressing logic. Svelte does. So to conditionally render some markup, wrap it in an if block. I now understand as an educator and someone who scaffolds things, this is why early in the tutorial, and I guess if you're someone that tries to educate people, think about this. Early in the tutorial, they showed us, where was it? I guess it might have been in reactivity. Yeah. Early in the tutorial, they showed us a ternary here. And as somebody that already knows Svelte, I'm like, well, why didn't we use the if block here? The reason is if you're new to Svelte, that's too much information all at once, right? So basically the way that they've scaffolded this is you learn all the stuff you need and just enough early on, and they don't introduce too much extra stuff because later on they want to focus on if blocks. So, and now we can also make a callback, right? So now a learner is coming through and they're like, oh yeah, well, I did this part of the tutorial. You're telling me I can write it in a different way. right? I guess technically they could write this as a if block as well. But what they're saying is add an if block here. So if count is greater than 12, oh, I don't need a expression there. Count is big. Yeah, so this will conditionally render if this expression evaluates to true. The thing is, we could rewrite this as a conditional as well, right? So if count is equal to 1, then we want to say time. Else we want to say times. Like that. So that nested ternary could be written as an if statement as well. Yeah. On hover, count times equals count. That could get exponential. Let's do it. Hover might not do it. We might need to do like mouse enter. And actually, I think I need to specify, yeah, so you got me here. This needs to be a function that can be run. Doesn't it? Why isn't this working? Why isn't hover working? Yeah, so you need a function that can be run. Oh, because it's 0. Okay, so increment it once. Now it doesn't work. Well, 1 times 1, 2. There we go. Okay, that makes total sense. I don't know why I was thinking that. It has to be greater than 1. Yeah, hover should work too. Infinity times. 1, 2. Well, apparently hover doesn't work. We need mouse enter. Nice. Nice. Count is big. Oh, actually, so yeah, I just showed you an else block. Basically, you have pound if condition, and if you want an else block, it's colon else. I think you can also do an else if, like that. Or if you just want an if block, you can do that. Now, I'll be honest. So if you're just learning Svelte, the examples are super great. So I mean, anybody that's seen me work with Svelte, I am like, if it's been a while, almost always I would go to this page, go back to their page talking about if blocks, so that I could remember the syntax. They also have editor tools for VS Code. So if you use the editor tools in VS Code, it's going to help you out with remembering this syntax. But it took me a while before I could actually memorize, or if before I could remember how they do their syntax here. This syntax is ridiculous. And honestly, I don't know if was this inspired by EJS or handlebars. Anybody know where this originated? Twig? PHP template engine? Pug? Yeah, so Twig uses the percent sign. Is it mustache.js? Condition? If? I don't think Svelte invented. Maybe they did. But I don't think they did. I think there was a templating language that did something similar. Um, find the art. Was there an? I guess there. Maybe there was an RFC because the like Svelte version 1 used directives. Did it? Did it use directives? Did you find it? Number 49. Technical background: C++, JavaScript. Um, Wait, do they just delete the files when it gets merged in? Oh, I see. This is switch block. Maybe there is. How do I find the one on if block? um, Maybe they never had an RFC because it um, was too early. Look at this. I mean, it looks like they're talking about the ideas here. Control flow. Here we go. It's less clear what to do about if else. We could, of course, do this. Though part of me feels like we're just continuing to accept the premise of handlebars. And that's a more natural approach waiting to be discovered. Just for the sake of argument. Maybe that makes you want to barf. I don't know. It's funny to see the early conversation. So this is a message coming from Rich himself. This was in 2018. They hadn't even settled on the syntax yet. You can see that there's no colon there. This was just like an idea. Um, yeah. Paul says, I have an idea. Why not use a unified scheme for all things? Sign, key, expression. For example, the control flow. Wait, did Paul just invent the colon syntax? And then keyed each blocks. Seems using obligatory signs parser able to ignore brackets. Paul is the god. So yeah. So this defines it. So I mean, okay, maybe this didn't originate anywhere else. Maybe via conversation they came up with this syntax. Three thumbs up, one thumbs down, one confused emoji. uh, it would be fun to do a little video on the history of the syntax, honestly, because it's a hot topic. I think any React dev that's getting into Svelte, like the first hang up is when they get to if blocks and each blocks, and they're like, ew, why would I do that? Ew. Um, yeah, I'll share this. Okay. See, this is fascinating, right? Because even in this comment, they hadn't settled on the syntax yet. They even Rich was like, well, what if everything is a colon? And in this case, this is literally an if element. An if element. Um, but I think if we're looking at the history of it, Paul Maley had the original idea, and this is how it works today. This is the same syntax as today. It's funny that you say discovered. It's literally just an issue on GitHub. Well, so yeah, I mean, let me show you. So if you've never seen Svelte syntax before, this is how you do conditional statements. You have a hash if condition, and then you render it out. And if you want an if else, you do colon else like this. And so, in the React world, we just use ternary statements or if statements with early returns. And that's what everyone's used to. So when they see this, they're like, ooh, why do I have to learn a new templating syntax? And then same thing for iterating over elements. In React, you just use a dot map. In Svelte, you use the pound each. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Once you start using Svelte, you'll install the extension, use the templates, you'll get used to the syntax. It's not hard to get used to the syntax. It's just very different than what React devs are used to. The current frontrunner is something like this, with the following possible additions. But a last-minute challenger has entered the race. 74 hidden items. All right, this is implemented in version 1.6, and you can use Svelte upgrade. But what's implemented? What did they agree on? Yeah, it's probably going to be easier if we look at the tests versus the actual implementation code. Yeah, so this is the actual template parsing code. It's so much. I want to find just an instance of if. Create if block. Oh. Okay, so this is the syntax they settled on. What's up with these comments? What is this file? Actual bundle v2? I don't know. Here's the issue if anybody else wants to look deeper into it. But I think I will. I'm going to reference it in my Meetup talk because there was a lot of effort and conversation that went into deciding what would the syntax actually be. Yeah. Write the same tag in React so we can compare. Yeah. So, for example, we have this count component, and then we have a conditional that will render a thing if the count is greater than a given number. So in our React component, we need a button to increment the count. So now we're in React land, right? We have a button. We're going to render out the count. And then when we click the button on click, can you see what just happened there? I went through Vue syntax, and then I was Svelte syntax, and then finally I landed on the React syntax. So when this is clicked, we want to set count to be +1. Okay, so etc. But first of all, the conditional here for times. So when count is equal to 1, it should be time singular. Anything else should be times. So that would actually just be in React, it would be a ternary statement. So we can say if count is equal to 1, then we want it to be time. Otherwise, we want it to be times, like that. So click 0 times, click 1 time, click 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, etc. And then down here, we can say something like if count is greater than 10, then we can say count is big. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. So you could do it with a ternary and a null in React. So in React, you could say, if this is true, render this, otherwise render nothing. And so finally, when count gets greater than 10, that gets rendered out. But the shorthand in React is to just do double ampersand like this. Because it's kind of short, this short circuits it. So if the left-hand side is true, then render this out. Because the way JSX works is if an expression evaluates to a Boolean, it doesn't actually get rendered out. So this is used in combination with short circuiting to do things like this, to render the thing on the right-hand side. So that's basically what's happening here is until this is true, this expression on the right-hand side won't ever execute because JavaScript only executes the first thing if it was false and it came across an and. But in React, this is how you would do it. You also could potentially have like a full-on return statement. So you could say like, if count is greater than 10, return this, otherwise return, I mean, you could rework this and maybe put it into a smaller component, but you could do something like this. You could wrap the whole thing like that, and then like that. So like technically, if the count is bigger than 10, it's going to render this one out. Otherwise, it's going to render. Obviously, you typically wouldn't do this because you'd like wrap it into a component or something like that. But the moment it goes bigger than 10, it now runs this return instead of this return. So that's a thing. Yeah. But I will say the reason I don't like this in React is it's too terse. Like when you come across large code bases in React and there are ternary statements everywhere, it gets really hard to read and really hard to like look at a few lines of code and try to just instantly understand what it's doing. It's pretty hard to read. Whereas Svelte, the conditional logic is the conditional syntax is very verbose, right? So I know that this is an if statement. I'm not squinting to try and see or try and remind myself how a ternary works. I don't know. I missed a bunch of messages. Smiley, thank you for the prime. Do you think React has a chance to become popular if it gets announced today? What do you mean if it gets announced today? Lorville React, I haven't seen that. What's up, Stony? I ignore. My chat stopped scrolling. Each cat feels so wrong. Yeah, you got to get used to it. I think that's the main thing. Yeah, I could agree with that, Amasil. I think that's the thing is like if you're a programmer, you could intuit what this code does, right? I think technically you could intuit what this code does in React as well, but there's just so much extra stuff happening. I don't know. Can I explain about prop drilling? Not right now or not today because we're talking about Svelte. But let's try to do a YouTube short. And maybe I'll go in and add some graphics afterwards, or just I'll post myself explaining this. So the Panda person asks, can you explain prop drilling? So prop drilling happens in a front-end app that deals with components when you have some data at the top level and you want to get it down to a component at a lower level. So it's known as prop drilling because you have to pass that prop every level down. So from the parent to the child to its child to its child until finally the component that needs that data has the prop passed all the way down. And so it's called prop drilling because you're literally drilling like 4 or 5 levels down. And the answer to it, or the answer to be able to do it without prop drilling, is to introduce some kind of global state management. And so essentially you can have your state defined at the top level, and then at any level below, you can write a piece of code that says, I specifically want this piece of data. And then instead of having to pass the prop down, that one little line of code can get access to that. So in React, that is the context API. And you essentially can use a context at a lower level that instantly gets access to the data that was defined at a higher level. So you don't have to drill the props down. But yeah, that's prop drilling. Does anybody think that can be a YouTube short? I think it can be a YouTube short. Oh, I see. I think if React was released today, there are too many other better options. I see what you're saying. Like, honestly, I feel like if React never, it's such an interesting thought experiment because like if React never happened, would someone try to invent it today? I don't think it would get as popular because if anybody remembers when React first came out, it actually like it was not popular. People were like, why is this function running over and over again? Why are you mixing HTML and JavaScript in a file? Like it took a lot of work for people to come around to using React and for it to become the standard. So no, I don't think it would be popular at all if it got released today because people would have options like Svelte or Vue, and people would. I think if you approach it from the other angle, right? So if you already had people using Svelte and Vue, why would they drop it to go use something like React? There are like very few, I think, good reasons. Like one reason might be it's extremely unopinionated and basically allows every React dev team to kind of do whatever they prefer. You could think of that as a plus. I don't think it's a plus because in practice, that makes it so that more time is spent arguing about ways of doing things. More time is spent on getting devs up to speed because one React code base is not equal to another React code base. Whereas if you compare that to like Svelte and Vue, things are more similar between code bases because there's so many things built into each of the frameworks that kind of just do the stuff for you that you don't have to think about 5 different ways to do a thing. I don't know. Prop drilling sounds like genetics, but you choose the trait. Yeah. So instead of getting passed down traits, it's like you get to define what traits do I specifically want. Yeah. Yeah. Please don't reach out to global state management to solve prop drilling as the first solution. What else do you do? I mean, I guess what I'm talking about is you introduce the context API. That's one thing. Or you reach for like Jotai or Zustand or any of the other state solutions. Yeah, the React docs are all right. I think it's funny that they don't cover TypeScript. And I think it's funny that it's very opinionated and a little bit confusing on how to actually start generating a React app. Starting a new React project. Use Next.js. That's just so weird to me. It's really weird. And then you have to click this to get in here for it to tell you, oh yeah, you could probably use Vite or Parcel. Wasn't React's competition AngularJS back in the day? Yeah, Angular 1. So the original Angular was the competition. I think the issue with Angular 1, people would get bit a lot with two-way data binding. Like it was harder to make things more performant because if you didn't know about the internals of AngularJS, then you could do things that would result in like slower apps because they would be re-rendering a lot. And so when React introduced, well, not React, the React got combined with the Flux pattern, which is like unidirectional data flow. It's a much simpler model because you don't run into situations where data can flow in 2 directions. And I think that's what most people had an issue with in Angular. But and I think this is one of the other, like we haven't gotten to binding yet in the tutorial here. When are we going to talk about that? We're like 2 sections away from that. But one of the nice things about binding is the syntax is super simple and you write way less code, but behind the scenes, it's still just a unidirectional data flow. It's like basically you get the nicety of the syntax of like just bind this thing without the complexity of needing to manage the whole unidirectional data flow like you do in React. Which is, I think, which is also the mindset shift in why it's easier to do these kinds of things in Svelte and Vue versus like the original Angular for someone that prefers unidirectional data flow. Yeah. Would Svelte, Vue, and other frameworks exist without React coming first? Yeah, absolutely. So Vue is heavily influenced by AngularJS. It got the idea of the virtual DOM from React, but the Vue didn't have a virtual DOM until like version 2. But the original developer experience of Vue was already there pretty early on. Yeah. Happy Svelte Day. What's up, chat? Thanks for the tier 1. I think I missed that. Appreciate you. Let's see, killer. Using composition in React to avoid prop drilling. Can I see the code? I don't want to watch a video. Oh, I see. If I understand it from what he's saying right here, is basically you have a top level component that's in charge of composing your component tree and then passing the data to the specific components that need it, versus passing it to dashboard, which then passes to dashboard content, which then passes to welcome message. I could see scenarios where this will work, but I also have worked in large React apps where like almost every component in this tree has its own set of props, and you would have to write the component in a completely different way to be able to write it without the props. So yeah, I think the thing is you need to start writing your app this way from the beginning to avoid the issue of needing to prop drill. But I think the issue is most React devs don't write their React app this way. I think that's the issue. Is that fair to say? is that fair? I don't know. Binding can be cursed. Yeah, I think one of the things that we came across in trying to write things with Svelte and also Solid is that you can run into dependency cycles. I don't know if that's the same thing or the same kind of issues you can run into with binding, but labeled statements aren't always super easy. And like sometimes you can basically create infinite loops of dependencies. And Geramo, thank you for the tier 1. Appreciate you. Yeah, we're gonna get back to Svelte now. All right, did we finish this part of the tutorial? We did. All right, now talking about else blocks. Good. So a pound character or an octothorpe. No, we're technically in part 1, but we're section 4 of part 1. The thing is, part 2 is advanced. I don't even think we're going to get into part 2 because this gets into animations. Honestly, I think classes and styles I'll probably cover in basics. Like I'll have in my talk, I'll have an entire section on styling, and I'll talk about how do you bind classes. I'll talk about scope styles. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to cover any of this stuff from any of this other stuff. Component composition, I probably will talk about slots, so I'm going to pick and choose. I'm going to cover most things from the basics, but we're basically halfway through the basics. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah, did anybody know this is also called an octothorpe? I feel like kids these days will call this the hashtag. It's the pound symbol or the octothorpe. Today I learned, yeah, the octothorpe. Octothorpe? The symbol, yeah, the number sign. Hash or pound. Yeah, so in 2007, widespread usage of the symbol to introduce metadata tags on social media platforms has led to the tags being known as hashtags. Octo, what? Yeah, check out the history of the number sign. Okay. Am I going to cover adding third-party libraries? I think it's going to be worth it to mention Razorson because there was that really popular video that the Primogen did recently where he read that article talking about Svelte is better than React. This one. He specifically read this article, and the basically the argument that this article makes is that people often use the argument that React has a bigger ecosystem. But this article lays out, well, in the Svelte world, you actually don't need to have as many wrapper libraries. You can kind of just use most of those libraries directly. So I think this will be worth mentioning probably like towards the end. Like, how do we use external libraries, or what are some references to external library? I'm only going to mention SvelteKit in the towards the end in the next steps. I'm not going to dive into like how to use SvelteKit, but you should learn the basics of Svelte first, and then eventually start to dive into SvelteKit. Also known as the pound sign, which is fun because that's true. Like in the UK, like pound is for money. Huh. Wait. Yeah. I'll make these public. So basically, next week I'm going to be giving this talk. So that will be public, and all of my code samples will be public. Right now, honestly, this is just an outline. This basically just is the exact outline from here. It's nothing special here so far. All right. We have else if as well. I'm gonna skip over this because I think if you can do if, you can do else, you can do else if. Each. Now here is iterating over lists of data. So this syntax also took some getting used to because you put the list as the first argument here. So if you look in view, it has the in keyword, or like in. So you say item in items, and so the list is on the right hand side. But in Svelte, the list is on the left hand side. So you say each name of the list, and then give it a variable name for what will be each thing in that list. So for every color, render this button. That's the current selected color. So yeah, right now they've they have a list of colors, and then they were manually adding each individual button. So yeah, this is a perfect use case for an each block. So we only need one button, and then we can render that button multiple times. So right now it's red, but if we do the each block, so we can say each colors as color, then we close out our each block like that. Put the button inside. And now instead of hard coding red, we can use color. So color will represent each one of these colors in the list. And so here we can just say that. We can do that. And I learned this today. We can do this. Fascinating. And then this changes the selected color. Yeah, I never used this. I didn't realize you could use curly braces inside of quotes without having to do like a template string or anything like that. But now this takes every color, renders it out as a button. Fun use for each. If you want to use a deeply nested property multiple times in one place, you can use the each block like this. Each some nested item as item and use it. Oh, honestly, that seems really handy, right? So you don't always want the top level thing you're repeating over. You potentially want like a nested property on the object. I like that. I like that. Yep. And then if you need the index, you can do comma variable name, and then you get access to the index in the loop. So here we can put index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Now keyed each blocks. So I need to add this to my list here. Iteration. Keyed. By default, when you modify the value of an each block, it will add and remove items at the end of the block and update any values that have changed. That might not be what you want. It's easier to show why than explain. Click the remove first thing button a few times and notice what happens. It does not remove the first thing. Kind of hard to show everything all at once. So we have 5 things: apple, banana, carrot, donut, egg. And then we're slicing at 1. So it removed apple. Actually, you'll notice that the emoji stays the same, but the text changes. Yeah, and so the issue here is we need keys. We need a way to tell Svelte how to keep track of these things. The name is updated whenever the prop value changes, but the emoji variable is fixed upon instant initialization. I see. Yeah, and then the way that we do keys is with the parentheses syntax. So you could do comma index, but then if you put parentheses, you specify which of them is going to be the key. I guess maybe the comma comes after. What if I need the index and I have a key? But now Svelte knows to keep track of it. You can use any object as the key, as Svelte uses a map internally. Using a string or number is generally safer, since it means identity persists without referential equality. Okay. Yeah, great. Let's move on. Await blocks are fun. This is the one thing that actually simplifies a lot of code in Svelte. Let's look at it. Most web applications have to deal with asynchronous data at some point. Svelte makes it easy with await. To await the value of promises directly in your markup. So just like you have an if block, you have a await block. And so you can await some promise, something that is going to be resolved or rejected. And then you have like your pending state. So when the promise is pending, you render this. When the promise has been resolved, you render this. If the promise has been rejected, you render this. So this is really nice because this, I mean, this is like a large majority of what we do in front end development. Call an API, get some data, render it on the page. And then you're almost always having to deal with like loading state, error state, all that good stuff. If you know that your promise can't reject, you can omit the catch block. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's do it. So get random number. Does that return a promise? Yeah, so that returns a promise. Oh, well, we have the promise variable here. I see. So let's do it. We have the await block. We're gonna await that promise. And when we're awaiting it, we'll say waiting. And then when we have it, we're going to render it. Is there like an as keyword? Await promise, then number. We can give it a name. So what is the thing we are awaiting? We can basically we're giving the name of the resolved value. And then we can also add a catch and then render the error like that. Waiting, request failed. Ah, so it fails sometimes. So sometimes we get a number back. Sometimes we get an error. But you'll notice the code for this was super simple, right? And Adam MC, thank you for the raid. Welcome in, raiders. We're learning Svelte. I mean, I already know Svelte, but I'm going through the tutorial because I'm going to be giving a talk on intro to Svelte, and I'm going through the tutorial to make sure I don't miss anything when I talk about it. But welcome in. What were you working on? Appreciate the raid. Android GDE and Rocket League. Nice. Appreciate you. Welcome in, raiders. We're doing web dev, so we're not doing Android dev. But I'll tell you a little bit about it if you're not familiar with Svelte. So Svelte lets you build front-end web applications. If you've ever heard of React.js or Vue.js or AngularJS, Svelte is a very similar thing. Yeah, I appreciate that, Adam. So yeah, Svelte is a similar thing. It's probably the newest of all the frameworks, but it's been around for a while. I guess I didn't even mention that earlier, but let's look at Svelte on Wikipedia to see when it was released. Because in my talk I am going to do a history of Svelte, but I'm gonna research that later. But yeah, look at so Svelte was initially released 6 years ago. Yeah, 2016. I think this is also baffling to people because a lot of people think that Svelte is much newer than it is, but you're basically just seeing the time span and evolution of these things, because we're basically at a point where a lot of React devs are seeing how potentially cumbersome React is and how much easier Svelte is and lighter Svelte is. And so it's taken potentially 6 years to get to that point, but yeah. I'd be interested to see you work on a small scale streaming app similar to Twitch. I've always avoided it because media delivery is not easy. So there's more to just a streaming website than just like the UI. Like I could build the UI very easily. Like basically like a clone of Twitch. Yeah, no, that's the issue, right? So once you want to start dealing with media delivery, it's a pretty complex problem to solve. You typically find some sort of like off the shelf solution, and then you like integrate with it. But yeah, streaming video is not an easy problem to solve. Is Svelte easier than Next.js? Easier is a relative term, but basically Next.js, the Svelte version of that would be SvelteKit. So SvelteKit is their server rendered hybrid web framework that can do single page applications, server side rendering, static site generation, client side rendering. It can do all that stuff. SvelteKit, and that's what you would compare to Next.js, because Next.js is built on top of React. React is the core UI framework, and then Next.js adds a bunch of stuff on top of it to give you file-based routing and data loading and server-side rendering. SvelteKit is that for Svelte. But I guess what is nice is SvelteKit is from the core team, so the same team that works on Svelte works on SvelteKit. Next.js is not from the same core team that builds React. React is an open source project. I mean, it started at Facebook, and so a lot of the devs on it are still from Facebook, but there's also a lot of people in the community that don't work on Facebook that work on React. Next.js is owned by Vercel. And so it's not from the core team. It still potentially has buy-in from the core team. But it's a thing. But SvelteKit is what you would look into if you want to do similar things as Next.js. And is it easier than Next.js? In some ways. Um, yeah. Yeah, but it's all relative, I would think. Oh, I didn't know you were a live coders member. Welcome in, Matisse. When was Svelte 3 released? Let's see if we can get like a version timeline. But you're right. V3 is when it really started taking off. 2019? Yeah, April 2019. Why do we need the await block? We don't. All right, so yeah, let's get back into let's get back into learning Svelte. Yeah. What's up, Buzz in here? Welcome in. Okay. Yeah, and that is a good talk and good reference there. Let me close all these extra tabs. And now let's talk about the await block. So technically, yeah, you don't need the await block. And honestly, we could implement this without the await block, but if you don't use the await block, you need a bunch of extra variables. And so what we just learned about here is this thing called the await block. You can await some promise that's going to be resolved or rejected. You can say, what should I show when the promise is pending? What should be displayed when the promise is resolved? And what should be displayed when the promise is rejected or if there is an error? And if we didn't use the await block, we would need a bunch of extra variables, right? So we would need a loading variable. Like this. And I mean, it's almost like we'd have to do when the component loads, loading equals false, like that. It's like weird to have to do it in line like that, but because we're not awaiting this thing that returns a promise, then that's what we would have to do. I mean, I guess technically we could do promise dot then. And also promise dot catch. Would this run every time? I actually don't know. But basically, we need a loading variable to determine is the promise loading. Let's see if this works for us. So, and then we would use an if block. So if loading is true, we say waiting. And so let's see if this works. Click it, waiting, and it should disappear eventually. It doesn't. So this didn't work. I think I would have to do this every time. Yeah. Well, the issue is when I assign a new promise, this code isn't going to run again. I guess technically I could put a labeled statement on it, because then when promise gets yeah, this is what I need, because then when promise gets reassigned, we waiting, done. Yeah, this would be the Svelte way of doing it. So this basically says rerun this code anytime promise changes. So when I reassign it, we always have the code that sets that. Is there a built-in finally? Then we just need that, yeah, regardless of if it caught or failed. But technically, we do need to tap into the catch to put it into an error value. Okay, so we've only covered the loading state. That's this. We've covered the loading state. We now need to cover the actual value. So I guess we'll call this value, and it starts off as nothing. But now I actually don't want to do this. I kind of want to put this into a function that like sets all of these values. Start get number, something like this. And so now this can be an async function where I can do some more fancy stuff and not have to like rewrite everything. Okay, we can say value is that, and then we await it. And here we can say loading is true, and then loading is false after all of it. And then if there was an error, now we need an error message variable like this. And right here we can say is error.message. I think this is what we would need to do. Can you use await outside of start get number? You probably could use it at the top level, but it's not what you want because this is basically what we want to do. So when the click is handled, start get number. I guess technically I can just put this in the I can just call this handle click. But what I also need to do is when the component loads, we call handle click so that way it gets us a random number. Okay, so if loading is true, show waiting. If value has a value, then we want to show that value. And if error has a value, then we want to show the error message. And I guess technically maybe it wasn't running on load, so we actually don't need that. We initialize loading to false. There we go. But that's kind of what I'm trying to demonstrate, right, Oscar? So if we didn't use the await block, we have to manage everything ourselves. So we need a loading variable, we need a value variable, and we need an error variable. And I guess technically we don't really even need this. We don't need the promise variable anymore. We can just do it all in here because this is, so if this resolves, we have the value. If it doesn't resolve, we have an error that we want to display. So now when I click it, loading, value, loading, request failed. But you now see an issue with my implementation in that with the await block, it only renders one of them and never renders all of them. So I kind of need to update my conditionals to say only show the value if error message doesn't have a thing. So if value and there is no error message, show the value. But if yeah, and then also, and if loading is not true. So if we are not loading and we have a value and no error message, show that. And if we are not loading and we have an error message, show that. So it gets a bit more complex. So waiting, request failed, waiting, request failed, waiting, request failed, waiting. Are we just getting really unlucky? Does anybody see the error in my logic? Oh, error. Oh, you're right. Thank you, Bluish. Error message still has a value, so we need to clear it out. You're totally right. So we should always clear error message out. Okay, waiting, request failed, waiting. There's a value. Cool. Yeah. So honestly, I mean, you can see how much work is happening behind the scenes with the await block, right? So if we didn't use the await block, we need 3 reactive variables, we need a try catch, and we need to handle the state of everything. But if we use the await block, we don't. We literally just need one promise variable, and then we can handle everything else. So, you know what? We do have else if. Okay, so I could write this with an else if. So, if loading, I think we would still need the not error message thing. So, and then yeah, we could have the else if here too. So we'd have to write it like that. It's a little bit nicer. Cool. I like this example. I'm gonna hold on to it for myself later. If I click this button, does it save it? I'm not worried about it. What the thing is, when I do meetup talks or conference talks, I don't like using REPLs. I like having my code editor running locally. So I'll have to pull that down anyways. All right. Next up is events. So this is going to be DOM events. Here we go. Enums instead of booleans would also avoid impossible states. I like that. Yeah, so basically instead of having a loading variable, you have a state variable. So you could have a state of pending, resolved, or rejected. And then your if statements get much simpler. So if pending, if resolved, if rejected. I like that. Okay. We can listen to any DOM event on an element using the on directive. So on event name, do a thing. Let's look at the code. So I think here I'll do on mouse move, handle move. So yeah, this gives you the exact location of the mouse while I'm moving here. You'll notice we get an accessibility error because we don't have an ARIA attribute, but they're not going to tell us how to fix that. Or like the ARIA role. I don't know what the role would be here though. Yeah. Did you oh, did you you made a video about that, Mattia? Nice. Feel free to link it in the chat. All right. Inline handlers. You can also declare event handlers inline. That makes sense, right? So instead of doing all this like that, we can define it inline like this. A nice little arrow function. Yep, very good. Let's see. Do this instead of representing state with booleans. Nice. I've been thinking about like good YouTube titles, and these typically do well, right? So if you're telling people to do a thing, or if you say like you're doing this wrong, people will click on that video. I like it. I wouldn't say it's clickbait. I would say it is reactionary. My booleans did what? You'll never use a boolean variable again after watching this. Exactly. Mattia's title game is strong. Yeah, I need to work on that. Let's see. Oh, that's literally your latest video. Nice. I haven't watched it. I feel like your other titles are more straightforward. But this is another example. Why does this work in Svelte and how to use it? I like question titles also, I feel like do fairly well because people are like, I want to know the answer. So they click on it. Oh, thank you, Iseli. Appreciate that. Welcome in. Okay, so we did inline events. That's great. Gonna add it to the list. These are cool. I have not used these often. I've maybe used event handlers like one time. So DOM event handlers can have modifiers that alter their behavior. For example, a handler with a once modifier will only run a single time. So when the thing is clicked, alert, but that only happens once. So click, alert, and I click it again. Oh, I have to add it. Like that. Click it again, nothing. So it only adds the event handler one time. or it only runs it once. This is the one that I use a lot though. The prevent default one is so handy because you can easily prevent the default action on a form without having to manually call it. You can literally do on submit, prevent default. Yeah. Honestly, this is the one I'm going to show in my talk. What are they called? Modifiers? The once is nice until I needed to add error handling. Yeah. And Woodsiger says, "Hey CJ, just want to say thank you. A while ago, I asked you for tips for my full stack app, the one with the boss who didn't want any boilerplate state management libraries and no cookies. I managed to finish my degree with a solid 10, the perfect score for my thesis. Heck yeah, Woodsiger, glad to hear it. And I'm glad to hear that it worked out. Because work situation, intrapersonal communication situations can always be tricky. So yeah, I'm glad it worked out. And congrats on getting your degree. Yeah, I don't know TypeScript tea time. Yeah, I don't know how you would do that. Potentially, you would need to like re-render a component, like a nested component that had the once modifier on it. I think that's how you would do it. I don't know. All right, component events. This is also something I never do in Svelte. But let's see if I should. So components can also dispatch events. To do so, they can create an event dispatcher. So we have an event dispatcher and we can dispatch events. Yeah, so in the Vue.js world, it was actually a pretty common pattern to use the Vue event bus, I think it was called, or like the $ emit, where a child component can emit an event that a parent component can listen for. Uh, in my experience, I just pass down functions. Very similar to how in React, if you want a nested component to alert a parent component, you just pass down a function. So this is a way of doing the dispatch, and then you have a way of like listening for that. So on some message, do the thing. So so in the inner component, we dispatch. So whenever it's clicked, we dispatch message. So the name of the event is message. So then in the parent, we could say on message. What does the hello actually do? Oh, it should alert it. What did I do wrong? Oh, I have to actually import dispatch. I see. How about now? Yeah, cool. But notice that the name of the message gets set here. So if I do something like this, now on the other side, that's the name that I need to use in the event handler. So that's kind of the benefit of this is like custom named events on components. Yeah, change the event name. I don't know if I'm going to talk about this in my talk. I'm going to put a maybe on there just because I never use it, but yeah. Yeah, and then you would need to combine this with event forwarding. So if you have like a deeply nested component that wants to fire an event that like a parent 3 levels up wants to know about, you're going to need to forward the event because it doesn't happen automatically. So dispatch message, great. Oh, I see. So you don't have to manually add all the dispatch and everything in the parent. You can just say on message, and then the parent component of this will now get access to that event. That basically forwards it up. Yeah. And so right now, the outer component isn't getting this event. It's not getting it. But right here, if we say on message, that's all we need. And now it forwards it to the parent like that. Nice. DOM event forwarding. Event forwarding works for DOM events too. Yeah, so I've never done this, but I feel like you would do this if you're building out like a Svelte component library, right? So if you're building out a Svelte component library, you need to like forward the click handlers and stuff like that. The on click event, doing like this would forward that event to the parent component. And it's just as simple as that. That's actually fascinating to me. Is we literally just do on click, and now the parent component gets forwarded that on click here, and so now that should work. Oh well, it's playing a sound. Cool. Amasil says I have never needed this. Yeah, I think the alternative solution is to pass a function down and then call that function, which is typically how I do it. And I got in that habit or learned that pattern from React. All right. Bindings, cool. So here's the thing about the scaffolding of this. I think you can talk about bindings as like one of the first things. Like this is something that we can cover, I think right after expressions and attributes. Because it doesn't require much extra knowledge. But let's look at it. So yeah, so as a general rule, data flow in Svelte is top down. A parent component can set props on a child component, and a component can set attributes on an element, but not the other way around. Sometimes it's useful to break that rule. Take the case of the input element. In this component, we could add an onInput event handler that sets the value of name to event at target value. It's a bit boilerplatey. Shots fired. So, this is how you would do it in React. I'll actually show an example in a second, because this is another one of the things that's like really cumbersome in React. You do it all the time, and it's like very straightforward in Svelte. After attributes, yeah, I think so. So once we learn about expressions and attributes, I think that's where I'll tie in binding. So yeah, we can bind the value. So here, if we put a bind on it, now anything I type into this box automatically updates. It's that simple. So I have a variable here. I have an input that I bind to that variable, and now instantly whatever name gets updated to on the input, it gets updated behind the scenes and then rendered on the page. If we want to do that same thing in React, let's show you how that is done. Imagine having to use set state. But yeah, let's write this same component in React just to give you an idea. So we have an h1 that says hello name, and then we need a name variable. So we'll say name and set name. We'll have a use state. Like that. Hello world, great. But now we need an input. So we'll have an input, And then we can bind the value to name. And you'll notice that it's in the input box, but no matter what I do, I can't change that because I need to actually add the event listener for it. So I need to say on change. We'll write the code to do it. We'll say set name, and then we need access to this event, and we'll set it to be event.currentTarget.value. Just trying to format this like that. Cool. And now this should do it, I think. Yeah, this does it. Wow. So as I type, it updates. So we declare easy. We declare a state variable. When the input changes, set the value of that state variable, and then render it out here. Compare that to Svelte, where we have a variable, we just add the bind keyword, and it just works. Like, how can you hate this? Like, what is there to hate about this in comparison to how you have to do it in React? And the thing is, in front-end dev, we're building forms all the time. That's like 30-40% of our job is building forms and managing the state of the form. Now, you could also argue that, thank you, Pablo. Thank you for the bits. A bit of bits. You could also argue that in a large React app, you probably wouldn't do this manually. You would introduce a library like React Hook Form or Formic. But I think that's an argument against React because it's like with Svelte, you don't need a separate library to handle forms. It's just really easy to do built in. If you make a video of this, I'll need to show it to my boss. I'll have to work with Svelte. It's on my list of to-dos. I want to make 10 things Svelte does better than React. I also want to do things you can forget about React if you learn Svelte. Yeah. It pre-processes things to imperative updates. Yeah, so basically we can look at the generated code in the examples. If you look at think like binding text inputs. Yeah, so if you look at the generated codes, they have a bunch of helpers. Like we dove into this earlier. So like the text helper actually creates text nodes, and like there's like a set data helper that sets some data attributes under the hood. Yeah, and then I guess is set input value is another built-in helper method. Yeah. So basically, we write code that looks like this. It gets generated into this code, and yeah. So Woodsiger was asking, it does not use a virtual DOM. Yeah, I think the way you could think about it, Codex, is like as your app grows, there's a certain point where the internal helper code that's required it's not going to need any more of that, right? Because in a large application, at a certain point, you have all the helper methods you need, and it doesn't increase in size after that. At that point, it's just how much more application code you can add. Flip the dev switch. True. Right, now it's going to be more verbose. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, I mean, most people aren't going to be looking at the generated code, but ultimately, this is all the code that you have to ship to the web browser. There's no runtime. It's just the utility methods it needs to keep things updated. Yeah, I think it got more verbose. So like around here, there's like some output messages like this. Options.hydrate only works. I don't know. Yeah. Talking about preprocessing, one thing I was worried about with Svelte was that it magically included dev dependencies during the build step. I was worried about security there. Wait, really? Like includes dev dependencies in the bundle? I don't know why it would do that. I think for Svelte kit, it possibly needs some of them if you have like a dev build. But yeah, it's really interesting because in the early days of like advertising React and convincing people to use React, everyone was like, "Oh, well, it uses the virtual DOM, and the virtual DOM is fast." Well, the virtual DOM is never going to be faster than actual direct DOM updates, and that's what Svelte does. Under the hood, it's just doing DOM updates. It's updating text content or setting attributes with direct DOM methods. And that's always going to be faster than some sort of intermediary thing like a virtual DOM. So what I guess what we meant or what people meant by the virtual DOM is faster is the virtual DOM is faster than completely wiping out the HTML and then resetting it. It's faster than that, but it's not faster than actually just calling DOM methods and updating the DOM in that way. Yeah. Did the virtual DOM become irrelevant because the browsers got faster? Well, I think that's one of the arguments for, well, the virtual DOM is like fast enough or like faster than just wiping out the HTML on the page. I think the other thing about like if you're trying to implement like a view updater with vanilla DOM and you're just wiping out inner HTML, you also like lose the state of the page. So there's a lot of extra stuff that goes into it as well. There was no way to exclude it. It's fascinating to see. Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, Codex, is like there is an update cycle in Svelte. Like it doesn't necessarily apply the changes directly immediately. There's like a similar idea to where like if you had multiple state updates in React, it's not going to immediately re-render. There's basically a render cycle, and then like the render doesn't happen until all of the changes have settled. There's a similar thing that happens under the hood in Svelte. Yeah, what's up, America 2050? I didn't schedule it. I just decided to go live. Yeah, and I agree with that, Mattia. It kind of was like just good enough. Yeah. How does Svelte do in large scale web applications? There are plenty of examples of large apps built with Svelte Kit that are doing really well. Now, I can't speak to enterprise resource planning or anything like that, but there's some big apps that have been built with Svelte Kit. Yeah, we talked about the labeled statement earlier. Svelto. um, but yeah, actually, I don't know what do they call it in Svelte? It's not reconciliation. It's probably lifecycle. Yeah, tick is the thing that eventually decides to update the the UI. So everything doesn't happen immediately. It's still smart enough to like batch updates to the DOM. All right, we saw text inputs. Let's see if there's anything special here. Number inputs, checkbox inputs. This feels fast to me. I don't understand. Why is it is this supposed to be like a dice is spinning on the table? I think it's like a dice rolling on the table. Yeah, so maybe that's not it, Codex. What did you call it, Mattia? Microtask queue? Well, that would have to do with promises. Svelte plus HTMX. I don't think that would work. Just because what I know about HTMX is like it involves a server-side process that's like generating HTML. You could potentially try to do like server-side rendered Svelte on the back end or something like that. Yeah, I can't speak to a codex, but what I will say is trust me. Also, like you can dig into it and find it, but um it's I guess you can also look at like benchmarks people have done comparing it to like virtual DOM implementations and stuff like that. But Svelte has been around since 2016. It's has a lot of really smart people working on it. I would assume that they are smart enough to not do things that are going to cause like many back-to-back updates and stuff like that. I would assume that they've run into those issues and they've solved it in a way. Now you could prove me wrong, but I don't feel like looking into it right now. I'm not gonna dive into it, but I would assume they've probably figured that much out by now. Um, yeah. You can also use bind value with select elements. That makes sense. If you have multiple type equals radio or type equals checkbox inputs, you can bind the group. Hmm. I'm not even going to dive into that. I feel like when you reach the point where you need a bound input group, that's when you'll learn this. But I feel like I don't do this often enough. People assume that about React too. I guess so. Um, but I think that's the main thing Codex as well. Is like I don't typically look into benchmarks and I don't look into thing like that. Like I have a feeling I saw a blog post a while back that was comparing bundle sizes of like React versus Svelte, and typically the bundles with Svelte were a lot smaller. I think that's the other thing to consider is at a certain point your app bundle will include all of these helper methods and that's it. With a React app, you always have to include the React library. Like the React runtime also always has to be included, and I'm pretty sure that the combined size of these helper methods is like nowhere near the size of the actual like React library. So if we're comparing it to that, um, that's really all I'm saying. Yeah, honestly, I might touch on that, Ched. So that's actually in the advanced section of the tutorial. So if we go into advanced Svelte, one of the first things is motion and transitions. Honestly, I might talk about that. But I do have to go soon. So let's get through this part of the tutorial and then I'm going to get out of here. All right, now we're into lifecycle methods. I also think lifecycle could be talked about earlier, but we'll get there. Stores and context? Stores is in basics, so maybe I'll talk about that. The thing is, I have never created my own store in Svelte. I guess the big app I'm working on is a SvelteKit app. Maybe I don't need it as much, but yeah. All of Svelte is 1.7 kilobytes. Yeah, so I think that's worst case scenario. Is you have to include all of Svelte, but the nice thing is, and for some apps, it can be optimized away and will be even smaller than 1.7 because there is no runtime. No, so Denver does not have a Svelte meetup, but we have a JavaScript meetup that I'm running now, and I'm talking about Svelte at it. So that's why we're doing this. We're not going to work on listed today. I wanted to work on this just because my talk is on Tuesday. And actually, I guess that's a call out for the YouTube channel. If you're not in Denver and you want to see me give that talk, if you sub to the YouTube channel, I'll be live on there on Tuesday next week. Hey, Jen. Welcome in, Raiders. Glad to see you all. Hi. We're talking about Svelte. I'm essentially going through the whole Svelte tutorial. So I've actually been using Svelte for like 5 years at this point, but 4 years, 5 years, but I've never actually gone through the tutorial. And I learned a few things. But we're towards the end of the beginner section. But that's basically what we're doing. So yeah, shout out to Jen. And I guess I just mentioned it, but I think Jen is in the Denver area. I'll be giving a talk on Tuesday next week, talking about Svelte at Denver Script. Okay, lifecycle methods is where we're at. Let's go. So every component has a lifecycle. The one you'll use most frequently is onMount, which runs after the component is rendered to the DOM. So when the component has mounted, do the thing. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see Codex. You should definitely do some kind of blog post about it to show the benchmarking of it. Yeah. We have a canvas we'd like to animate using the paint function. Begin by importing the onMount function from Svelte. OnMount, grab the canvas, get the context, do the thing. Honestly, this is I want to enable. I don't want to type all this out. This is not Svelte code. This is request animation code. This is a wild example. I will say, like, if you're newer, here's the thing that I don't like about this kind of scaffolding. Well, like, I actually, which I don't think is scaffolded well. If you have never worked with Canvas before, this example is going to be nothing to you. I think a better example would be something we do very often in components is onMount, call an API, right? OnMount, do something in that component. Not onMount, do something with the the Canvas API or whatever else. But oh yeah, so it's animating it now. I see. So onMount, we grab the canvas. Here is the interesting thing though, is like what's nice about Svelte, because the eventual code that gets compiled to is just vanilla DOM. You can do things like this and not have to worry. Like in the React world, you would not do document.querySelector, right? You would have a ref. I think that's the other interesting thing is that they're not using a ref here. They could actually just be using a ref. Like they could say, I don't know how exact. I think you do like bind this canvas, something like this. I'm gonna say let canvas like this, and then we don't have to do this. Yeah, this is the other way. You actually don't. You have to do the query selector thing. You can just get a reference to the element. I'm curious in their tutorial though, where do they have? Is this like in advanced for like element refs? Advanced bindings. This. Yeah, they put that. Oh, look at that! In a previous exercise, rip this out and replace it with a bind. Yeah, welcome in, Jen. I don't know if there were any ads playing whenever I was welcoming you all in earlier. But yeah, glad to see you. Thanks for bringing all your friends over. Yeah. I think if you show actions in your talk, it might be worth it alone. Are we talking? I don't even know what actions are. Can you point them to me in the docs? Oh, here they are. Here they are. Actions are essentially element level lifecycle functions. Use. I mean, the only time I've used the use directive is in the use enhance in SvelteKit for enhancing a form. I see, but you can define like a custom action that gets access to the nodes and stuff. Huh. Is it exporting a function? Yeah, so you, wow. Wow. You get access to the DOM node and then you can just do whatever you want. Huh. Huh. So what's nice about this and like why I'm excited is like it honestly makes for much more reusable element reference code, right? So like in the React world, if you need to get reference to a DOM element, you get a ref to it and then like you have your code and a use effect that like modifies it or whatever. But it's like specific to that component. And I guess technically you could pull that out into a reusable hook, but it seems like actions are much more reusable by default because they just operate on like a DOM node. So that's cool. That's cool. Very cool. Yeah, okay. So, um, to clean that up, we need to return a cleanup function from onMount. Didn't know you could do that. So that is new to me. If you have an onMount, you can return a function and that's like your disposal function. Yeah, okay. And then before update, after update. Honestly, though, I've never used before update and after update. I've only ever used on mount. And a lot of times I don't even need to use on mount because, like, technically you can put code at the top level in your script. I feel like on mount is really only necessary if you need to access the DOM elements. Hmm. Before update will first run before the component is mounted, so we need to check for the existence of the div. That makes sense. Cool. In my talk with the debug, I don't know if I've ever used. I mean, I've never used this. Um, does that console logs it? Yeah, it does. Fascinating. Stuck at whether Svelte or Solid to look at next. Honestly, I think it really comes down to like if you prefer JSX and like the development experience of React, and you don't want to learn something new, probably go with Solid. But if you're open to different template syntax, um, and and all that, then probably go with Svelte. Um, you can use lifecycle methods outside the component. How would that even make sense? But debug, cool. I'm gonna mention that. Um, the other thing is Svelte has been around longer than Solid. Um, so Svelte has been like version 3 came out in 2019. Solid has only been out for maybe like 2 years at this point. So Svelte has been around longer. If you're gonna factor that into your decision, um, so yeah. I think the main thing is um, if you don't like the syntax, I think you can get used to it, and I think eventually once you get used to it, you'll see how much less cumbersome it is than JSX. But it takes using it a lot to see that. I think it's really hard up front to see that this kind of syntax is going to be uh what's the word? Um yeah, like harder to use or cumbersome compared to JSX. But I do think in my experience, JSX in the long run is actually more cumbersome. So, all right. I've also never used the tick method, but uh, basically this forces all of the I think it forces all of the DOM updates and everything under the hood to happen, so that way you can have the latest information according to the elements and according to the DOM. Returns a promise that resolves as soon as any pending state changes have been applied to the DOM. Svelte self? Contain itself recursively. Oh! um, wow. How have I never done this? I guess because typically, like, I wouldn't write a component that contains itself. I would write a parent component that contains the two child components, like with potentially with slots or like React children. Yeah, that's what I'm saying is like I would have so the scenario here for like a file tree and like a folder having a folder inside of it, I would have a component called file tree and it would do the nesting. Folder would potentially have a slot or a children that I pass folder to, and that gives you a recursive component. What's up, Pranjal? I'm doing good. Yeah, and see you later, TypeScript Tea Time. Thank you for hanging out. So, what is Svelte use compared to use effect? That, my friend, is one of the best things about Svelte. Is you don't need a use effect. You just write your code, and it works. Potentially, the labeled statement might be the comparison. Um, what did we do earlier? Yeah, log something when the count changed in React. In Svelte, you would look at the reactive declaration. So basically, anything you put in front of the $:colon will rerun if its dependencies change. And you don't have to manually specify the dependencies. Svelte is smart enough to pick out what the dependencies are. Yeah. What are the other special elements? Self component element window. Wait a second. That's super cool. How many times have you written in a React component that needs event handlers like on the document or on the window? And you typically like you'd have a use effect where you add those and remove those event listeners in the use effect. But with Svelte, you don't need that. They have this little helper. You just put that in your component, and now it's adding those at the body level. This feels like cheating. I think that's the thing, though. And honestly, that's my biggest gripe with React is like, there's so many things that you do over and over again. There should be something that makes it easier to do instead of having to put all of that boilerplate, all like the use effect and the add event listener every single time. It'd be nice to have a little helper like this, right? Boom, done. What does a fragment do? Place content in a name slot without wrapping it in a container DOM element. Whoa. Svelte fragment slot equals game. I'm not gonna pretend like I understand what that's saying. I'm gonna keep moving though. All right, where were we? we're finishing up this. Yeah, so we did tick. I'm not going to talk about tick because I think it's in a more advanced use case. It's like you need to make sure that all of the updates have been flushed to the DOM, so that way you can perform some calculation or use some value that's dependent on the DOM updates. Not gonna do that. All right, stores I will talk about, but like I said earlier, is like I actually don't use or haven't used my own Svelte stores. I've used the stores built into SvelteKit. So SvelteKit has like a page store and a few other things. So if you imagine in like a server-side rendered app where you have some data that got passed down from the render and you need to use that in like a nested component, that's where the page store can come in, because in that nested component you just import the page store and you can get access to that data. It's kind of like built-in global state management. I use stores versus passing props. I think you do a mix. You should do a mix of both, because it's possible to write some serious spaghetti code with the store. Yeah, that's basically that's basically it. Woodziger is you don't need a Redux or anything like that. You can just use the built-in store. Store is simply an object with a subscribe method that allows interested parties to be notified whenever the store value changes. We create a writable store. Now, in incrementer, wire up the plus button. Update. Yeah, so this is interesting though, because the stores basically have like a setter function. In this case, it's the update function. So this is closer to like a state variable in React, but basically what that allows us to do is the rest of the app can be alerted when that happens. Yeah. Well, don't feel like a dork, Woodziger. I think the thing is like if you're going to be trying to find a job straight out of college, a lot of places use React. So to say that you have experience with Zoostand and React Query, I think that's great, right? I think that's the other thing about, and I guess I haven't even touched on that today, and talking about, like, I'm being very critical of React today and comparing it to Svelte, but I think the caveat should be, if you are a beginner, shame on me. If you're a beginner, it's my advice is probably that you should actually learn React, just because there are more jobs that are doing it. And honestly, React is so much harder that if you go from React to Svelte, you're going to have a pretty easy time, because there's just a bunch of stuff that you don't have to worry about and a bunch of stuff that you can just forget, basically, when you start to learn Svelte. Whereas if you go the other way, right, if you do Svelte first, there's so much built in and so much that it does for you that if you try to maybe interview at a job that's like doing React or something like that, you're going to have a much harder time, because there's all these like Reactisms and stuff like that. So yeah, my advice, if you're a beginner, just use React, learn React. It's going to be good in the long run for your career. If you are someone that is a decision maker, right? Like you are in a higher position at your job and you get to decide, should we use Svelte or React on our next app? Consider Svelte. That's really where all these comparisons are coming from. I guess the other point is, like, if you're not a decision maker and you're working on a team, you are potentially learning things about Svelte that you can use and bring to your manager to be like, hey, I saw this thing and maybe we should look into it. Yeah. But yeah, I would say if you already know React, like, and you've been working in React and you're newer, yeah, don't beat yourself up. Like, it's honestly, it's good. It's good to have that experience. I don't think ChatGPT is a banned word. I think honestly, it highlighted you are a beginner. I think maybe it thought you were being mean, but you weren't being mean. The automod, I mean, highlighted that. It feels to me like job postings overuse the term senior dev. That's probably true. Yeah, I could get behind. I could agree with that. um, and then the resetter, we need to set the count to 0. Oh, we didn't do the decrementer. Beautiful. Auto subscriptions. That's true. In the Netherlands, I haven't found one company that uses Svelte or wants to use it. All React and PHP, Angular or Vue. Yeah. All right. All right. The app is in the previous example works, but there's a subtle bug. The store is subscribed to but never unsubscribed. If the component was instantiated and destroyed many times, this would be a memory leak. Declare our unsubscribe. And then we pass it to onDestroy. So onDestroy is another lifecycle method. So reference a store by prefixing the name with a $sign. And this is automatically subscribed and unsubscribed. Here's the thing. This is what we do in SvelteKit. And I didn't know it. But that's why in SvelteKit, you do $page to access the page store. So that way it's an auto subscription and unsubscription. You don't have to manually call subscribe and onDestroy. Fascinating. Yeah. That's basic. Yeah, I mean, and if you didn't catch that, that's basically what it's doing is instead of having to write all this boilerplate of subscribe on destroy, you literally just put a $sign in front of it and it handles all of that for you. That's really cool. All right. I don't think I'm going to cover stores in the intro to Svelte. I think I'm going to call this like next steps because I feel like, you could have an entire talk or an entire lesson on stores themselves, like readable stores, derived stores. This is like, I guess, like a computed property. But yeah, I think I'll touch on it, but I won't dive into it. Cool. Yeah, see you later, Codex. I'm actually about to leave too. Have a good one. Thanks for dropping in. All right, I just want to look at transitions because I don't think I've ever done transitions in Svelte. And look how easy it is. So right now, by default, it just appears and disappears because we're using this conditional. So if visible is true, show this. If it's not, don't. But if we wanted to animate, all we got to do is import the fade transition and then on the element say transition fade. So import the fade transition and then on the p tag say transition fade. And just like that, wow. Wow. It's so wow. And that's awesome. And they have a bunch of other built-in transitions apparently. So I have like fade. Actually, do they have like fly in? Let's see if they do. There might be some transitions that require. I broke it. Is it just fly? But then I have to pass in arguments, right? Or let's see. We have to go to the docs now. Or look at the examples. Yeah, so fly, you have to specify like from what direction and how long it should take. Let's just do this though. So, Oh. So the y starts at the, I guess if you want it to come down, you could do like -200. And so when it shows up, it falls from the top. You could also do it like if you want it to come in from the left, you could do like that. So yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that, Mark. Honestly, I mean, that's not something that I get to like. I've narrowed in on to think about like why do I like Svelte these days? Why do I like Svelte more than Vue? But that is one thing that Vue really does have going for it. When you define a reactive variable, there's nothing special about it. Like it could be defined in a separate module, and no matter where you import it, Vue is going to know to keep track of it. And in Svelte, that's not the same thing. In Svelte, you specifically have to use a store if you're doing things outside of the Svelte world and you want Svelte to know that things are happening. Um, so yeah. Yeah, transitions are cool. And then there's a context API. I've never used the context API either. So this allows components to talk to each other without passing data or props. It's an advanced feature, but a useful one. There's an add item function that adds an item to the canvas. And then I guess at some point we're going to say use context canvas, and then we get access to add or get context. And then we have access to add item. I see. So the context just has a name, a string name. I don't like that. There's probably a better way to do it. I don't like it. Fascinating. So yeah, I mean, even in their docs here, set context and get context just uses a string name, string key. Seems fine. I mean, I can think of a way to make it like reusable and not have to have strings all over the code base. So yeah, that's what I'm like. You have a symbol or like you have a map, something that makes it reusable. Yeah, I don't see it, but that would make sense. Use a symbol, or like even, honestly, even use like an enum or something like that. Why you should not use Svelte? So should I have a section on that? No, I don't know. Don't I want to cover adding external libraries? It's going to be in the extra section, and I'm probably just going to reference that blog post. But yeah, see you later, Be Mine. All right, I think that's it for now. I think that's it for now. I'm obviously going to do some of my own research this afternoon and this weekend. But on Monday, I am going to potentially practice my talk. So I'm going to try to have my talk put together. And it's going to be more than just an outline. It's basically going to be 30 minutes intro to Svelte, 30 to 45 minutes, and I'll have my slides ready to go and everything like that. So definitely tune in on Monday. And I'll be giving my talk on Tuesday. But check out the schedule. It's blank right now, but I'll update it. But ideally, I'll be going live on Monday to practice my talk. I'm leaving, so now I'm gonna link all my stuffs. Check me out on YouTube. I'm also over on Twitter. And join our mailing list. So I send out go live notifications and also weekly updates. So I'd appreciate it if you join the mailing list and tune in next week. I think that's it. Yeah, and thank you, Mattia, for hanging out with us today. We had the YouTube King of Svelte on in the chat today. I'll link your channel really quick if you haven't seen Mattia's channel. They do the Joy of Code, and they teach Svelte, so definitely check them out. All right, let's go on a raid. I don't know who we're gonna raid, but whoever we raid, show them lots of love. Drop a follow if you like what they're doing. You can use that raid message if you're a sub. You can use this raid message if you are not a sub. And before we do the raid, we'll have credits, but practice the raid message. Get ready to do the raid. Oh yeah, and if you want to learn React from someone who is so critical of React, check out my course. Yeah, reactroots.com. The thing is, I'm not critical in the course. I teach what you need to know to be successful with React and TypeScript. Yeah, I've also made the comment, like, would you rather learn React from someone who doesn't see all of its warts and inefficiencies, or someone that does and can still be enthusiastic about it? I don't know. I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks everybody for hanging out. I'll see you next week. Wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And until next time, here's this. So we're gonna raid John Leiter, the creator of Vuetify. I had no idea he's streaming on Twitch. He's working on Vuetify 3 right now. So definitely show him some love, drop a follow and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're not familiar with it, Vuetify is like the material UI design framework for Vue. But yeah, be kind. I'll see you all over there.